Having trouble winding down? Forget counting sheep. We're building impossible worlds with logic gates. For the next 3 hours, let the gentle hum of cascading binary decisions and the subtle manipulation of reality guide you into a profound state of relaxation. Discover how the very essence of computation can be repurposed to craft a tranquil, mind-bending journey designed to help you fall asleep. Let's start with first. Double-bind switch. Imagine standing before 2 doors. Behind one lies the way forward. Behind the other, nothing but endless walls. To move, you must satisfy a condition written above them. Enter only if you can prove you should not enter. The paradox burns in your mind. If you walk through, you've broken the rule. If you don't, you've failed to act. This is the essence of the double bind, a trap woven not from chains or walls, but from logic itself. 2 conflicting conditions, both demanding obedience, both canceling each other out. No matter which way you turn, the action betrays the requirement. The double bind is more than a puzzle. It is a prison of the mind. In human life, it shows up quietly, disguised as expectation. A child is told, "Be spontaneous." The moment they comply, they fail, because true spontaneity cannot be commanded. A worker is told, "Take initiative," but never go against protocol. The moment they act boldly, they are punished for stepping out of line. A lover is told, "Be honest with me, but don't hurt me with the truth." The instant truth arrives, pain follows, and trust fractures. These aren't mere contradictions, they are snares that catch the will, making every path one of failure. What makes the double bind so terrifying is that it leaves you moving in circles. The more you struggle, the deeper the entanglement grows. To obey one command is to break the other. To ignore both is to be accused of inaction. You are trapped in a paradox where even silence becomes incriminating. It is a kind of psychological lock, a riddle with no key, and the longer you sit within it, the more it corrodes clarity. History is filled with such snares. Ancient laws that demanded obedience to rulers, yet punished citizens for failing to act independently. Religious edicts that insisted on unquestioning faith, yet condemned blind followers for lacking understanding. Even modern systems fall into this trap. Rules that demand absolute transparency while requiring absolute discretion, freedoms offered with chains already fastened. In every case, the double bind is not an accident, it is a mechanism of control. It ensures that no matter what choice you make, you remain guilty, complicit, contained. Philosophers have long pointed to these paradoxes as cracks in the foundation of order. If freedom can be granted only by surrendering freedom, is it truly freedom? If truth must be spoken but cannot wound, is it truly truth? The double bind does not merely trap behavior, it destabilizes reality itself. It shows us the fragility of language, of law, of systems built on absolutes. Because the moment 2 absolutes collide, the human caught between them is crushed. And yet, there is a strange liberation hidden within. Some who face the double bind realize the trap cannot be solved, it can only be escaped. They stop playing the game. The child told to be spontaneous refuses the command entirely, finding freedom in disobedience. The worker bound by impossible orders resigns, reclaiming initiative outside the system. The paradox dissolves not when it is solved, but when it is abandoned. To step out of the bind is to reclaim choice. But not everyone escapes. Many remain inside, haunted by the impossible loop, their lives shaped by contradictions they can never resolve. For them, the double bind is not a puzzle, but a haunting condition of existence. Every step, every silence, every decision echoes with the same impossibility. Whatever you do, you are wrong. So the next time you find yourself in a situation where 2 commands cancel each other out, where every path demands betrayal of the other, pause. Recognize the trap for what it is. Because some prisons are not made of stone, they are made of words. And the only way out of a paradox is to stop letting it decide the terms of your life. Infinite loop trap. Imagine standing at the crossroads of a decision. One path leads left, another leads right. You weigh the pros, the cons, the risks, the rewards. But just as you begin to choose, your mind circles back. Doubt returns. Logic argues with itself. Each conclusion breeds another question, each answer folds into another problem. You are not moving forward, you are cycling, trapped inside the orbit of your own thoughts. Hours pass, days even, and the choice remains suspended, frozen in a loop that refuses to break. This is the infinite loop trap, where logic itself becomes the prison. The human mind was built to solve, to calculate, to plan. But there is a hidden flaw: logic has no natural endpoint. For every reason there is a counter-reason. For every path, an alternate path. You tell yourself you'll decide after one more comparison, one more analysis, one more layer of certainty. Yet certainty never arrives. The loop tightens. The more you think, the less you move. It begins subtly. A student deciding which subject to study. A worker debating whether to quit a job. A lover hesitating at the edge of commitment. They ask themselves a simple question: should I or shouldn't I? But soon the question multiplies. What if I regret it? What if there's a better option? What if staying is worse than leaving? What if leaving is worse than staying? Each answer births another question, and the cycle spins faster, louder, until logic becomes noise and clarity dissolves into static. There are countless examples. A man once spent weeks deciding whether to accept a new job in another city. He listed every factor: money, opportunity, family, lifestyle. But each list contradicted the other. Pros became cons, cons became pros. He thought he was being thorough, rational. But by the time he made his choice, the offer had expired. His decision was stolen, not by fate, not by chance, but by his own endless logic. Another woman described planning her wedding date, only to cycle through so many possible venues, seasons, and guest lists that the decision was never finalized. Years passed, the relationship crumbled, and she admitted that the marriage itself was trapped inside that infinite loop. The trap is not just indecision. It is paralysis disguised as progress. The mind convinces you that cycling through every possibility is movement, that logic is bringing you closer to resolution. But the truth is, the loop is its own cage. It offers no exit, because logic always feeds itself. There will always be another angle, another detail, another possibility to weigh. Why does this happen? Because logic seeks perfection. It demands a flawless answer. But life is not flawless. Life is messy, unpredictable, full of unknowns. And so the search for perfect certainty becomes endless, because perfection does not exist. The infinite loop trap forms when logic refuses to accept imperfection, when the demand for absolute clarity denies the reality of uncertainty. There is something terrifying in this. Because while you are trapped in the loop, life does not wait. Opportunities pass, relationships dissolve, moments vanish. The loop does not freeze time, it only freezes you. And when you finally look up, you realize that while you argued with yourself endlessly, the world moved on without you. Philosophers have long warned of this danger. Zeno's paradox, infinite regress, the problem of the undecidable. These are not just thought experiments, but mirrors of the human condition. Each demonstrates the same truth. Some questions have no final answer, some choices cannot be proven correct in advance. To demand proof is to demand infinity, and infinity cannot be lived. And yet, there is also a strange allure. The loop feels safe. As long as you are cycling, you do not risk failure. You do not risk regret. You remain in the shelter of thought, untouched by consequence. But this safety is an illusion. It is like being trapped in a room where the walls are made of mirrors. You can look forever, but you will never find a door. The infinite loop trap is not only mental. It appears in technology, in algorithms, in machines that repeat endlessly because they lack the command to stop. In computers, an infinite loop is a flaw, a bug, a breakdown of purpose. The program never reaches its goal, it only cycles until it crashes. And yet, in our own lives, we accept this same flaw as if it were caution, wisdom, responsibility. We fail to see that we too are crashing, silently, while the loop consumes our time. The way out is not more logic. The way out is to break the loop by stepping outside of it. To act without absolute certainty. To accept that no decision is flawless, that risk is inescapable. This is the paradox. The only way to defeat the infinite loop trap is to choose while doubt still lingers. To leap before the loop convinces you that leaping is impossible. So the next time you feel your thoughts circling endlessly, recognize it for what it is. Not careful planning, not responsible caution, but the infinite loop trap holding your life hostage. Ask yourself, what am I waiting for? What proof do I think will arrive that has not already failed to appear? And then step out. Break the cycle. Because while the loop is endless, your time is not. Because some traps are not built by others. They are built by the mind itself, and the only escape is to walk away before the cycle consumes you. Contradiction unlock. Imagine being told two things that cannot both be true. One voice says the world is solid, fixed, unchanging. Another insists it is fluid, impermanent, nothing lasts. You try to choose, to decide which is correct. But the door stays shut. Then, something strange happens. You stop choosing. You hold both statements at once, impossible as they are. And suddenly, the door opens. A hidden truth is revealed, but only because you accepted the contradiction. This is the paradox of the contradiction unlock, the key that turns only when opposites are held together. At first, it sounds absurd. How can opposites both be true? We are raised on logic, taught that contradiction is failure. If A is true, not A must be false. That's the bedrock of reason, the frame of science, the language of mathematics. Yet again and again, in the deepest corners of life, contradiction appears not as failure but as gateway. Some truths cannot be reached by choosing a side. They can only be reached by embracing both sides at once. Think of the human condition. You are fragile, breakable, mortal. And yet, you are resilient, enduring, capable of surviving more than you believe. Both statements seem opposed, but both are true. Or think of love. It is selfless, demanding sacrifice, and it is selfish, demanding possession. To deny either side is to flatten its reality. To accept both is to glimpse its depth. Contradiction does not destroy truth. It unlocks it. Examples are everywhere if you look. A monk is told, you must strive with all your energy, yet you must release all striving. The contradiction seems impossible. But only in holding both, striving without clinging, does the doorway to peace open. A scientist studies light. It behaves like particles. It behaves like waves. These cannot both be true, yet both are true. Only by accepting contradiction does physics move forward. Or consider identity. You are the same person you were 10 years ago, and you are utterly different. Both statements are true. To hold them both is to unlock the mystery of continuity itself. In psychology, this is called dialectical truth, the idea that two opposites can coexist and, in tension, reveal a higher perspective. In Zen, it is koan, what is the sound of one hand clapping? A contradiction not meant to be solved but inhabited, so the mind cracks open into awareness. In mysticism, it is union of opposites, darkness and light, death and life, human and divine. Each contradiction unlocks something deeper, something logic alone cannot reach. But why does this work? Because reality itself is not bound by our categories. We want clean lines, true or false, right or wrong, this or that. Yet the universe does not obey these binaries. It is both wave and particle, both chaos and order, both ending and beginning. To demand neatness is to demand a smaller world than the one that exists. Contradiction is not error. It is the shadow of vastness. And to unlock truth, we must be willing to sit inside it. Still, it is not easy. Contradiction is uncomfortable. The human mind craves certainty. To hold opposites at once feels like standing on shifting ground, as though the self will collapse under the weight of paradox. Yet if you dare to hold it, the collapse is revelation. The key turns. Truth flows out. Not simple truth, but layered, infinite, shimmering truth. So the next time you face an impossible pair of statements, you are free, yet bound by destiny. You are insignificant, yet everything depends on you. You must act, and you must surrender. Pause before rejecting one. Try accepting both. Feel how the tension stretches you, how it pulls the mind into wider shapes. That is the contradiction unlock. A door that only yields when you stop forcing logic and start embracing paradox. And when you step through, you discover something profound. Truth is not a single blade, sharp and one-sided. It is a mirror cracked in two, and only when you look into both fragments at once do you see the whole reflection. Circular premise lock. Imagine standing before a locked door. You reach for the key, but the key itself tells you, I can only open if the door is already unlocked. You try to push the door, but the door answers, I can only open if the key has already been turned. This is the trap of the circular premise lock, a conclusion and a premise that depend entirely on each other for proof, each claiming authority but neither grounded in anything outside itself. It is the intellectual equivalent of trying to lift yourself off the ground by pulling on your own hair. Take, for example, the statement, this book is true because it says it is true. The premise and the conclusion are mirrors facing each other, reflecting endlessly, creating the illusion of depth where there is none. Another example, we can trust this leader because he says he is trustworthy. Or, in more subtle form, I know this belief is right because it feels right, and it feels right because I know it is right. These are not arguments. They are loops, closed systems where the snake devours its own tail and insists it is being fed. The danger of circular reasoning is that it disguises itself as certainty. To someone trapped inside it, the loop feels airtight, flawless, undeniable. After all, every question leads back to an answer, and every answer leads back to the same question. But outside the circle, it is obvious. There is no foundation, no anchor, no independent proof. It is a castle floating in the air, convincing only because its walls echo themselves so loudly. Consider history. Entire doctrines, political systems, even religions have sometimes leaned on the circular premise lock. This law is just because it comes from justice itself. This idea must be true because it is written in the book, and the book must be true because it contains the idea. For those within the circle, challenging it feels impossible, because every escape route leads back inside. It is a self-reinforcing cage. On a personal level, circular reasoning haunts our daily lives. Think about doubt and fear. I'm a failure because I can't succeed, and I can't succeed because I'm a failure. Or love and self-worth. I'm lovable because someone loves me, and they love me because I'm lovable. These are not logical arguments. They are emotional loops. But they hold us just as tightly, keeping us trapped in cycles of self-belief or self-destruction that feed endlessly on themselves. The truly unsettling part is how comfortable the circle can feel. It gives us the illusion of safety. The mind whispers, why look outside for proof, when proof is already here, circling perfectly within itself? The loop feels whole, unbreakable, like a lock that has no keyhole because it needs no key. But that is the trick. A lock that doesn't open isn't protection, it's a prison. To escape a circular premise, you must step outside it, introduce something external, a ground that does not depend on the circle itself. Evidence, experience, logic that does not simply echo what is already assumed. Without that, the argument can spin forever, convincing only those willing to mistake repetition for truth. The circular premise lock is more than a flaw in logic. It is a mirror of how we often live, trapped in routines, beliefs, and justifications that seem complete only because they feed themselves. It reminds us that certainty without grounding is just an illusion. A door and a key staring at each other, each insisting the other will move first, while nothing ever opens. Paradoxical reduction. Imagine this. You take something apart to make it simpler. You strip away the extras, remove the clutter, pare it down to its essence. Minimalism, efficiency, clarity, that is what you expect. And yet, instead of becoming easier, the thing becomes harder, more confusing, more tangled. The very act of reducing has birthed a new complexity. This is the paradoxical reduction, the strange phenomenon where less does not simplify, but instead deepens the maze. Think of language. You remove words to make a sentence leaner, but suddenly it becomes ambiguous. The nuance, the rhythm, the hidden meanings, gone. What once was clear now fractures into multiple interpretations. Or think of mathematics. A teacher simplifies a problem by cutting steps, skipping what feels unnecessary. The result. Students are more lost than before, unable to trace the logic because the connecting bridges have been removed. The reduction did not lighten the burden, it created a new weight. Consider design. A software developer trims features to declutter the interface. At first glance, it looks elegant. But now the user has no obvious path, no way to find what they need, no guidance. What was meant to be simple becomes frustrating. Or imagine a city removing street signs to create a clean aesthetic. The absence forces drivers to hesitate, to second-guess, to make mistakes. The attempt at reduction increases chaos. The paradox appears in human life too. A person thinks, I will cut down my obligations, I will reduce my commitments. But in doing so, they create new gaps, silence that feels heavy, idle time that multiplies anxieties, social absences that create loneliness. What was supposed to free them creates new chains, invisible but tighter. Or someone trims their diet to simplify food. They remove entire categories, sugar, grains, dairy. What remains? Endless calculation, substitutions, restrictions. Eating, the most basic act, becomes a labyrinth. There is something profound hidden here. Complexity does not only come from abundance. It also comes from absence. When you remove, you force the remaining pieces to work harder. Their roles stretch, overlap, collide. The system grows dense, interwoven, unstable. You think you have simplified, but you have only hidden the intricacy beneath thinner skin. Like cutting support beams from a house, you may see fewer lines, but now every wall must bear impossible weight. Even in philosophy, reduction creates paradox. Take identity. You strip away labels, roles, names, histories, thinking you will reach the true self. But the deeper you cut, the more questions rise. If not this, then what? If not father, worker, believer, child, then who? The fewer the labels, the harder it becomes to define. Reduction does not reveal essence, it exposes the abyss. Paradoxical reduction unsettles us because it challenges our faith in simplicity. We are taught that less is always better, that clarity comes from subtraction. But the truth is more complicated. Sometimes subtraction is distortion. Sometimes the act of removing creates more confusion than the mess we were trying to avoid. The elegance of minimalism is real, but it is not guaranteed. In chasing it blindly, we can trap ourselves in systems harder to navigate than the cluttered ones we abandoned. And yet, there is also something hauntingly beautiful about this paradox. It reveals that life resists simplification. Reality is layered, recursive, infinitely knotted. Every attempt to compress it creates new folds, new shadows, new meanings. We cannot escape complexity. It is built into the fabric of existence. The penultimate irony is this: by trying to make things easier, we often make them more profound. So the next time you are tempted to cut away, to strip down, to reduce, ask yourself, will this truly simplify, or will it summon new complications from the void? Sometimes less is not less. Sometimes less is infinitely more. Observer's gate. Imagine standing before a doorway. On one side of the frame lies certainty, on the other side lies possibility. You don't know what waits beyond until you step forward, until you look. But here's the catch: the instant you observe, the outcome itself bends, reshapes, alters. It is no longer what it was a moment before. The act of watching rewrites what is real. This is the observer's gate, a threshold where reality does not exist independent of you, but instead rearranges itself beneath your gaze. At first, it sounds like philosophy, but science whispers the same truth. In quantum physics, The double-slit experiment shows that particles behave like waves, spreading into infinite possibilities, until they are measured. The moment they are observed, the wave collapses, and the particle chooses a path. Reality itself waits to see if someone is watching before deciding how to exist. The universe, it seems, does not like to be caught naked. But beyond physics, the observer's gate is everywhere in human life. Think of memory. Events you recall are never the same as they were. Every act of remembering reshapes them, bends them into new forms. The past does not lie frozen. It mutates every time you glance back. Think of behavior. A person alone is oneself, but under the gaze of others they change. Posture shifts, words alter, actions reshape. They pass through the observer's gate without knowing, becoming something different the moment they are seen. Even truth itself is caught in this paradox. A secret exists in one form while hidden, and in another the moment it is revealed. The unsettling part is what this implies. Nothing exists in a stable state. Outcomes are not carved until eyes fall upon them. Until you examine, there is only possibility. Until you observe, there is only potential. The observer's gate is not a door in space. It is a door in perception, a reminder that your very act of looking is a kind of creation. But this realization carries a darker weight. If the world changes when you watch it, how can you ever know what is true? How can you trust that what you see is what was there before your gaze reshaped it? Perhaps every outcome you witness is already altered, already compromised by the fact of your observation. In that sense, you never see reality. You see only the version of reality that exists because you are watching. Some find comfort here, believing it means we are co-authors of existence. That without our gaze, the universe is unfinished, and by looking we give it form. Others find only dread, realizing that certainty is impossible. That the act of chasing truth guarantees distortion. That behind the observer's gate, the thing you most want to know will always slip away, changed the instant you touch it. And yet, perhaps that is the point. Perhaps reality was never meant to be a fixed painting, but a living performance. Not something to be captured and pinned, but something that becomes only when attended. In this view, the observer's gate is not a trap, but an invitation, to recognize that watching and being watched are inseparable from being alive. So the next time you demand certainty, the next time you believe you have caught the truth in its pure form, pause. Ask yourself, is this reality as it is, or reality as it looks when I press my gaze upon it? Because some doors do not open into rooms. Some doors, like the observer's gate, open only into mirrors, showing you not the world as it is, but the world as it must become the moment you decide to see it. False dichotomy switch. You are told there are two doors. One leads to success, the other to failure. One leads to truth, the other to lies. One to safety, the other to ruin. You hesitate, weighing the two, calculating which will save you, which will destroy you. But what if the choice itself is the trap? What if the real path is neither of these doors, but a hidden third one, concealed by the illusion of only two? This is the false dichotomy switch, the trick of believing that life's possibilities can be reduced to either or, when in reality the most important option is the one deliberately kept out of sight. Think of how often it happens. A politician tells you it is us or them, progress or collapse. A business offers two versions of a product, convincing you there is no other choice. A teacher says you must be right or wrong, pass or fail. But the world is not built in binaries. The world is layered, complex, tangled with endless possibilities. The false dichotomy switch works by shrinking the horizon, trapping you into thinking the only freedom you have is to choose between two cages. It begins subtly. A teenager told they must be either successful or a disappointment. A worker told they must stay loyal to their job or throw away stability. A lover told they must forgive completely or abandon entirely. These choices feel heavy, absolute, suffocating. But the weight is artificial. The trap works because you accept the framing. You stand before two doors, when in fact there may be 100 unseen corridors stretching beyond them. There are examples everywhere. A man once faced a decision. Should he continue working a job that drained him, or risk everything to quit and start over? For months he cycled between the two options, believing those were the only paths. But when he finally spoke to others, he realized there was another way. He could reduce his hours, take part-time, and build something new slowly. The real choice was hidden until he rejected the false dichotomy. Another woman believed she had to choose between marrying someone she did not love or being alone forever. But in time, she discovered companionship in places beyond the binary of marriage versus loneliness. The hidden option was not between those two, but in redefining what love and belonging meant. Why do we fall for this trap so easily? Because simplicity is seductive. The mind craves certainty, and nothing feels more certain than a binary. Yes or no. Black or white. Left or right. The false dichotomy offers comfort in its clarity, but at the cost of truth. Reality is never that clean. It is messy, paradoxical, overflowing with alternatives that are deliberately hidden by the framing of only two. The darker part of the trap is how it is used against us. Those in power thrive on false dichotomies. Leaders tell us we must support them or face chaos. Companies convince us we must buy one product or settle for less. Even within ourselves, we fall into it, believing we must succeed or we are failures, that we must be strong or we are weak. By reducing infinite possibility to two extremes, the world shrinks, and with it, our freedom. Philosophers have long warned about this. The idea that truth and falsehood are not simple opposites. That light and dark are not the only spectrum. That human life is built in gradients, not absolutes. Yet even knowing this, we are tricked again and again, because the illusion is so persuasive. The switch hides the third option not by erasing it, but by distracting you with urgency. Choose quickly, it says. Choose now. Do not look for the path you cannot see. There is something terrifying in realizing how many choices in our lives have been false. How many times we stood before two doors and believed the lie that one of them must be ours. How many years we spent debating which was right, never realizing that both were wrong. The trap is not just in making the wrong decision. The trap is in not realizing the right decision was hidden from us entirely. But there is also hope. Because once you see the trick, you cannot unsee it. The moment you ask yourself, what option am I not being shown? The illusion begins to collapse. Suddenly you realize you are not trapped between two cages. Suddenly you see the walls between them are thin, and beyond them lies open ground. The false dichotomy switch only holds power as long as you accept its framing. The moment you reject it, the game changes. So the next time you feel trapped between two options, this or that, yes or no, win or lose, pause. Ask yourself, who benefits from me believing these are the only choices? What am I not being allowed to see? Because chances are, the path you need lies outside the binary. It has been hidden not because it does not exist, but because you were never meant to look for it. And when you find it, when you walk the path beyond the false doors, you will realize something profound. Freedom does not live in choosing between two limits. It lives in refusing the limits altogether. Because some traps are not built to hold you in place. They are built to hold your imagination hostage. And the only escape is to see that the choice you were told to make was never the real choice at all. Inversion logic key. Imagine a key that doesn't turn the way you expect. You push it left, but the lock opens to the right. You try to pull, but the door only opens when you push. That is the essence of inversion logic. A way of thinking that unlocks the world not by following cause and effect, but by reversing them. You don't ask, if I do this, what will happen? Instead you ask, if I want this to happen, what must I undo? Inversion logic is not comfortable, but it is powerful, because it teaches us that sometimes the straight path forward is hidden until you walk it backwards. We are trained to believe cause precedes effect. Work hard and you succeed. Save money, and you gain wealth. Speak kindly, and you make friends. But inversion logic flips the pattern. Sometimes, it is not working harder that makes you succeed, but stopping the habits that sabotage you. Sometimes, it is not saving money that makes you wealthy, but refusing to spend on what drains you. Sometimes, it is not speaking kindly that makes you loved, but silencing the words that wound. By reversing the order, by seeing effect as teacher, cause as student, you uncover truths hidden by habit. History is full of such reversals. Think of medicine. For centuries, doctors tried to cure by adding treatments. More herbs, more bloodletting, more interventions. But the greatest advances often came from subtraction. Not adding, but removing. Stopping infection, removing toxins, cleaning wounds. The cure came not by doing more, but by doing less. Cause and effect inverted, and in that inversion, survival was unlocked. Or think of warfare. Most generals attack head-on, believing pressure leads to victory. But some of the greatest victories came from inversion, retreating to lure the enemy forward, surrendering one ground to win another, seeming to lose in order to win. The effect, victory, came not from direct cause, but from its reversal. Even in personal life, inversion logic opens unexpected doors. You want happiness. Most chase it directly. Do more, buy more, chase more. But happiness often comes from the reverse, removing what makes you miserable, subtracting noise, cutting excess. You want freedom. You try to break rules, to resist. Yet freedom sometimes comes from discipline, from choosing boundaries that unlock greater power. Cause and effect reversed, yet the outcome is real. Science itself bends under inversion. Gravity pulls things down. Yet Einstein showed that spacetime curves not only because mass creates gravity, but because gravity shapes mass. Cause and effect are not a one-way street, but a loop. In quantum physics, particles influence each other across time, as if the effect ripples backward to shape the cause. Reality, at its core, may be built on inversion logic. Psychologically, inversion forces humility. It asks us to admit that our instincts may mislead us. That chasing success directly may blind us to the traps around it. That seeking light too eagerly may blind us more than sitting in darkness. Inversion logic feels unnatural because it contradicts our craving for straight lines. Yet when we dare to reverse the line, we find the lock opens with surprising ease. Philosophers have long whispered this truth. Taoism teaches Wu Wei, achieving by not forcing. Zen teaches that enlightenment arrives when you stop grasping for it. Even modern thinkers use inversion as strategy. Instead of asking, "How can I succeed?" they ask, "What would guarantee failure?" Then they avoid those causes, and success emerges naturally. By looking through the lens of reversal, they unlock what direct pursuit could not. The danger, of course, is that inversion logic can feel like madness. To act by reversal is to risk stepping off the safe path of common sense. And yet, the greatest breakthroughs, the greatest revelations, often come dressed as madness first. To reverse cause and effect is to court paradox, but it is also to invite possibility. So when you face a door that refuses to open, ask yourself not what key should fit, but what key should be turned upside down. Ask not how to push harder, but how to step back. Ask not what you must do, but what you must undo. That is the inversion logic key. A key that turns the world backward to unlock outcomes you never imagined. And when the lock clicks open, when the impossible door swings wide, you'll understand. Sometimes the straightest line to truth is drawn in reverse. Schrödinger trigger. Imagine this. You stand before a choice. Two options lie in front of you, equal, unresolved, both waiting to be real. Until you act, both exist, like twin shadows overlaying the same ground, neither stronger than the other. This is the Schrödinger trigger, the state where reality itself hesitates, holding multiple outcomes at once, waiting for the moment you decide. The instant you choose, the illusion shatters. One possibility is born into existence, the other dies quietly, collapsing into nothingness. Think of the gun that may or may not be loaded. Until the trigger is pulled, both realities exist in your mind. Life continues, or death strikes. The Schrödinger trigger is not just about physics. It's about the way our choices carve the universe. Before the act, everything is possible. After the act, only one path remains. And every decision, no matter how small, is a trigger. The job you take, the the partner you love, the word you speak in anger or in kindness, all are moments where parallel realities exist until you collapse them by deciding. The unsettling part is this: while we live, we are surrounded by infinite Schrödinger states. The email you haven't opened yet both contains good news and bad. The phone call you haven't answered yet is both joy and disaster. The exam result you haven't seen yet is both success and failure. Reality in these moments is not fixed. It's fluid, suspended, like a coin spinning in the air. Only when you look, only when you act, does the coin fall to one side. But here's the haunting question: what happens to the reality that doesn't survive? Where does it go? When you choose left, does the right-hand path vanish forever, or does it continue somewhere else, without you? Some physicists whisper of the multiverse, that every decision spawns two realities, one where the trigger falls one way, another where it falls the other. If that's true, then every choice you make doesn't kill a possibility. It births two worlds, and only one keeps you. On a psychological level, the Schrödinger trigger explains why anticipation is often more terrifying than the event itself. Waiting for the test result, waiting for the diagnosis, waiting for the confession. That waiting is unbearable because in that suspended state, every reality is true at once. You are both healthy and sick, both accepted and rejected, both safe and doomed. The trigger hasn't been pulled, so you live in a limbo where hope and fear overlap perfectly. The collapse, even if painful, brings relief, because at least the uncertainty dies. But there's a deeper danger. Some people learn to live inside the Schrödinger trigger forever, never deciding, never acting, keeping reality suspended so they don't have to face the collapse. They don't confess their love, because as long as they stay silent, both yes and no exist. They don't open the envelope, because as long as it stays sealed, success and failure are both alive. They never pull the trigger, because potential feels safer than truth. But life doesn't wait forever. And when the trigger is avoided, time itself collapses the choice for you. Think of how many paths in your own life are still suspended, waiting. Friendships that could be deepened or abandoned. Risks that could change everything or nothing. Dreams that are alive only because you haven't dared to test them. Each one is a Schrödinger trigger, ticking silently, waiting for the moment you pull. And when you do, 1,000 worlds collapse into one, and your story changes forever. So the next time you find yourself frozen, staring at the fork in the road, remember this: indecision is not safety. It is a cage where all outcomes suffocate together. The Schrödinger trigger is always in your hand, whether you admit it or not. To pull it is to collapse possibility into reality. To refuse is to let time pull it for you. Either way, the world you live in is born the moment the trigger falls. Conditional illusion. Imagine this. The mind builds conditions. If this happens, then that must follow. A neat structure, a logic box. If, then is how we make sense of chaos. If I study, then I will succeed. If I am kind, then I will be loved. If I obey, then I will be safe. At first glance, it feels solid, almost mathematical. But what happens when the if is impossible? When the foundation itself cannot exist? Suddenly the chain collapses into distortion. This is the conditional illusion, where impossible premises birth outcomes that look logical but bend reality into madness. Take the old paradox: if pigs can fly, then I am king. On paper, it seems harmless, a silly if-then. But the moment you accept the impossible if, the then slips into reality's frame. The brain does not distinguish between what can never be and what follows. You start living as though the then has substance, forgetting the if was smoke. People do this every day. If I never make a mistake, then I will be worthy. But the premise, never making a mistake, is impossible. Yet the condition governs their lives, twisting them in pursuit of an outcome chained to a fantasy. Look deeper, and you'll see how entire systems rest on conditional illusions. Economies: if growth is infinite, then prosperity will follow. But infinite growth is impossible, and so the prosperity born from it becomes fragile, distorted, false. Religion: if I am perfectly pure, then I will be saved. But purity beyond human nature is unattainable, leaving people tormented by outcomes they can never earn. Even love, if they change completely, then we will be happy. The condition is impossible, and so the happiness never arrives, yet the illusion holds the mind captive. The power of the conditional illusion lies in how it masquerades as logic. The structure feels airtight. If A, then B. No one questions it, until you examine A and realize it cannot exist. The trap is subtle, because the then often feels emotionally real. You can imagine the success, the safety, the love. You can picture the outcome vividly. And so you forget to check the premise. The impossible if becomes a quiet tyrant, dictating your life through promises that cannot be fulfilled. Think of a student who believes, if I answer every question perfectly, then I will have value. Each test becomes torment, because perfection is impossible. Yet the distorted outcome, feeling worthless when one answer is wrong, feels real. Or a worker who thinks, if I sacrifice every hour, then I will be secure. The sacrifice is endless, but true security never comes. The illusion feeds itself, leaving only exhaustion. Conditional illusions can be weaponized, too. Leaders, advertisers, manipulators construct false premises so that outcomes feel inevitable. If you buy this, then you will be admired. If you obey me, then you will be safe. If you fear them, then you will be free. The if is twisted, impossible, or meaningless, yet the then grips tightly, shaping decisions, shaping lives. The structure is so simple it bypasses resistance. You don't notice the rot in the foundation because the house looks so clean from the outside. But there is something even stranger. Conditional illusions don't just distort decisions, they warp reality itself. When enough people act on them, the impossible becomes the center of society. Wars have been fought on ifs that could never be true. Empires have been built on premises that crumble the moment they are touched. Entire cultures chase distorted outcomes, convinced that if the impossible were achieved, paradise would follow. And yet the pursuit itself reshapes history, leaving ruins where logic pretended to stand. The unsettling truth is this: the human brain is addicted to if, then. It is the skeleton of thought, the engine of prediction. Without it, we drift in chaos. But with it, we risk building castles on sand. And when the sand is impossible, the castles collapse in strange ways. Outcomes that look real, feel real, even hurt us as though they were real, but are nothing more than distortions born of illusions. So ask yourself, what conditions govern you? What if whispers beneath your choices? If you trace it back, does it stand solid, or is it impossible, invisible, absurd? The conditional illusion thrives when we do not examine the premise. But if you see it for what it is, the spell breaks. The then evaporates, and you are free. Until then, you will keep chasing outcomes written on impossible paper, living in a logic that was broken before it began. Symmetry collapse. Imagine a system built with flawless symmetry. Every force mirrored, every weight balanced, every pathway identical. At first glance, it looks like perfection, stable, eternal, unshakable. But then you notice something unsettling. Nothing moves. Nothing changes. The very balance that promises harmony has instead created paralysis. This is symmetry collapse, when perfection folds in on itself, when balance becomes stasis, when the absence of difference suffocates possibility. Think of a tug-of-war where both sides pull with equal strength. The rope does not move forward, does not fall back, it hangs suspended, frozen. Or picture two mirrors facing each other, endlessly reflecting, each one so perfectly aligned that no new image can enter. Infinity without progress. A loop without escape. Symmetry in excess is not peace, it is a cage. We see this in nature. Crystals form with perfect patterns, but a slight disturbance, heat, vibration, stress, can shatter them instantly because the structure cannot bend. Ecosystems too finely balanced collapse when one tiny variable shifts. Even in physics, there is a haunting truth. Absolute symmetry, if it existed, would prevent the universe itself from forming. Without imbalance, without a tilt, a flaw, a break, matter would cancel itself out. There would be no galaxies, no stars, no life. It is imperfection, not perfection, that allows existence. But symmetry collapse is not just cosmic. It is human. Imagine two choices so evenly matched that neither can outweigh the other. You stand trapped, unable to decide, because perfect balance has stripped you of motion. This is paralysis by symmetry. Indecision not because of weakness, but because no option carries more gravity than the other. Life halts. Time feels suspended. Every step forward requires imbalance, yet symmetry has locked you in place. It happens in relationships too. Two people mirror each other so exactly, every word reflected, every emotion echoed, that no growth can occur. A conversation loops endlessly, not in conflict, not in harmony, but in sterile repetition. Balance without difference. Presence without movement. Slowly, the relationship suffocates under the weight of its own stillness. And what of society? A system where opposing forces cancel perfectly, where every action has an equal and opposite counteraction. Laws that cannot pass, decisions that cannot form, progress frozen under the illusion of balance. On paper, it looks fair. In practice, it is collapse. The machine is too symmetrical to turn. The deeper horror is this: symmetry collapse doesn't feel like destruction. It feels like safety. No chaos, no disorder, no tilt. But hidden inside that calm is stagnation. A clock that has stopped ticking looks peaceful, but its peace is death. Symmetry promises eternity, but eternity without change is indistinguishable from void. And yet, perhaps there is beauty in this paradox. Because collapse reveals the necessity of imbalance. It shows us that motion comes from difference, that growth is born of asymmetry, that even flaws are the cracks through which time flows. Without tension, no music. Without tilt, no falling into love. Without imbalance, no birth, no death, no story. So the next time you find yourself longing for perfect balance, pause. Ask yourself, would you truly want symmetry so complete that nothing can shift? Because some prisons are not made of walls, but of mirrors perfectly aligned. And when symmetry collapses, it does not explode outward in chaos. It folds inward, into stillness so absolute that life itself disappears. Mirror reversal lock. Stand before a mirror and you know what to expect. Left becomes right, right becomes left. It is not magic, not mystery. It is simple reversal. But what happens when logic itself falls into the mirror? When arguments, relationships, meanings, all flip in such a way that the truth becomes its opposite. You begin in clarity, but by the time the reflection has finished its work, everything is inverted. You are caught in a mirror reversal lock, where reasoning folds against itself until what once was certain collapses into contradiction. It begins innocently. You make a statement, and it feels true. You test it against logic, and the reflection confirms it. But look deeper, and the reflection bends. Soon the opposite appears just as valid, just as strong, just as undeniable. One moment, the glass shows you sense. The next, it shows you nonsense dressed as sense. You can no longer trust what you see. The mirror has locked you inside the inversion. Think of the old paradoxes. If I say, I always lie, is it true or false? The mirror turns the answer inside out. If it is true, then I am lying, which makes it false. But if it is false, then I do not always lie, which means sometimes I tell the truth, which could make the statement true again. The reasoning flips endlessly, each inversion creating another. This is not logic leading to clarity. It is logic trapped inside its own reflection. There are countless examples in life. Consider love and hate. At first, they seem like opposites, clean and distinct. But look closer, and the mirror blurs them. Hate is not the absence of love, but its twisted reflection. The more you love someone, the more deeply you can hate them if betrayed. The feelings invert until they are almost indistinguishable, mirror images locked together. Or think of freedom and control. The pursuit of absolute freedom often requires structures, rules, and authority to protect it. But then, those very structures begin to feel like control, the opposite of freedom. The mirror flips the relationship, and what began as liberation becomes captivity. This is the unsettling power of the mirror reversal lock. It does not erase meaning. It inverts it. It forces you to see that opposites are not as far apart as they appear, that every truth carries its own shadow. In philosophy, this is the danger of dialectics without resolution, the endless flipping between thesis and antithesis with no synthesis to escape. In politics, it is the way revolutions born in the name of freedom can become regimes of oppression. In personal life, it is the way our strongest values can turn into their own destruction when carried to extremes. The lock is terrifying because it feels airtight. Every attempt to reason your way out only strengthens the inversion. You say, "This must be true," but the mirror replies, "Then why does its opposite fit just as perfectly?" You insist, "This is right," but the reflection whispers, "Right and wrong are mirrors of each other, and you are caught between them." The more you fight, the deeper you sink. Some thinkers argue that the mirror reversal lock is built into reality itself. That meaning is not fixed but relational, and every relationship can be flipped. Light defines dark, but only because dark defines light. Good defines evil, but only because evil defines good. If one disappears, the other collapses too. The mirror does not just reflect, it binds, locking opposites together in endless inversion. And yet, there is also a strange beauty in this. Because the lock reveals that opposites are not enemies, but twins. They define each other, give shape to each other, cannot exist without each other. Perhaps the mirror reversal is not a trap, but a truth, that meaning only exists through contrast, and that every statement, every value, every belief, carries its opposite hidden within it. But the danger remains. If you stare too long into the mirror, you forget which side you are on. Arguments collapse into their reversals. Love collapses into hate. Freedom collapses into control. You begin to doubt not just what is true, but whether truth exists at all. The lock seals when you can no longer distinguish between reflection and reality. When every answer feels like its opposite, when every door leads back into the same glass corridor, you are trapped. So how do you escape? Perhaps the answer is not to fight the inversion, but to accept it. To recognize that the mirror will always flip, that every truth has its shadow, and that meaning lives in the tension between the two, not in choosing one or the other. The lock loses its grip when you stop demanding absolute clarity and begin living with paradox. Still, the mirror remains unsettling. Because once you realize how easily meanings invert, how quickly truths collapse into their reflections, you begin to wonder, how much of what I believe is only the mirror image of its opposite? How many of my convictions are shadows dressed as light? And yet, perhaps that is the final lesson of the mirror reversal lock. It does not exist to destroy meaning, but to remind you that meaning is fragile, fluid, and always in danger of flipping. It teaches you not to cling too tightly, not to believe too absolutely, because at any moment the mirror can turn, and the truth you swore by becomes the opposite you cannot deny. So the next time you find your reasoning flipping endlessly, pause. Recognize the mirror for what it is. Do not mistake reflection for reality. Step back before the lock seals. Because once the inversion takes hold completely, every path leads back to its opposite, and the glass will hold you there forever. Because some traps do not chain your body. They chain your meaning. And once the mirror reverses it, you may never see it the same way again. Temporal gate shift. Imagine standing before a door you believe will open only once. You reach for the handle, certain that the choice you make now will shape what lies ahead. But as your hand hovers there, something unsettling stirs. The future you imagine is not waiting passively. It is already reaching back, folding over the present, shaping the very decision you think you are making freely. This is the paradox of the temporal gate shift. When outcomes from the future loop back, bending the logic of choice itself, altering the past that produced them. At first glance, it feels like science fiction. Time travel, alternate timelines, paradox loops. But pause and look closer. How many times have you felt it? That eerie sense that your decision was influenced not by what you knew, but by something you didn't yet know. A job you turned down, only to later discover it would have led to disaster. A path you chose without reason, only to find it guided you towards something essential. In those moments, cause and effect twist. It is as if the outcome already existed, and in its existence, reached back to shape the cause. Think of the strange déjà vu that clings to such moments. You walk into a room you've never seen before, yet you know where each door leads. You speak a sentence, and it feels rehearsed, as if your future self whispered it into your past ear. These are hints of the temporal gate shift, where the future does not wait politely in line but bends back, altering the logic of now. History is filled with stories that suggest this loop. An inventor who abandons one idea without reason, only to later discover that idea would have been his ruin. A soldier who chooses one path on instinct, avoiding an ambush he could not possibly have foreseen. A writer who dreams of a scene, records it, and years later lives it in detail. Did these choices create the future, or did the future create the choices? The line blurs, and what we call free will begins to tremble. Science too whispers of such bends. In quantum physics, outcomes are not fixed until observed. But what if the observation itself reaches backward, collapsing not only the present state but the path that led to it? In theories of retrocausality, particles seem to be influenced not just by their past but by their future. A photon decides its path only when measured, yet that measurement echoes backward in time. The universe itself may operate on a temporal gate shift, where the arrow of time is less an arrow and more a loop. Psychologically, this paradox reshapes responsibility. If the future can alter the past, are your decisions truly yours? Or are they echoes of outcomes that already exist, nudging you backward into alignment? Perhaps your sense of choice is less about creating the future and more about remembering it. Each decision feels like carving a path, but maybe you are simply stepping into a road already paved, your footsteps placed by a future that insists on itself. But there is also liberation here. If outcomes can bend backward, then every decision point is alive with possibility. What you imagine as the end may already be shaping the beginning. Failure that feels crushing now may be the very thing your future self needed to alter the course of your past. The gate is not static, it shifts. And in that shift lies both terror and hope. Terror that your autonomy is fragile, hope that nothing is ever truly fixed. Philosophy has long gestured toward this. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence, the sense that your choices are not new but lived again and again, looping through time. The Buddhist view of karma, not simple cause leading to effect, but an endless cycle where effect becomes cause across lifetimes. Even mystics spoke of destiny not as a straight line but as a spiral, where the future is constantly folding back to realign the present. So what does this mean for you, standing before your own gate? It means your decision may not be as linear as you think. To hesitate is not weakness, it may be listening to whispers from a future that already knows. To act on instinct may not be chance, it may be the loop tugging you into alignment. The temporal gate shift reminds us that time is not a rigid chain of before and after. It is a fabric folding over itself, weaving choices and outcomes in both directions. The true challenge is to live with this paradox. To accept that your past is not as solid as it seems, and your future is not as distant as it feels. Every decision is both cause and effect, both seed and fruit, both beginning and ending. And when you feel the strange tug of déjà vu, the uncanny sense that you've been here before or already know what comes next, remember, the gate is shifting. The future is not waiting for you. It is already here, rewriting your past. And when you turn the handle, when the door finally opens, you may realize that it was never about stepping forward into the unknown. It was about stepping into a moment that had been waiting for you all along. Redundancy paradox. Imagine this, you build a fortress. Thick walls, iron gates, watchtowers, and guards at every corner. From the outside, it looks impenetrable. From within, you tell yourself you are safe. But here is the paradox. Because you believe the fortress cannot fail, you stop paying attention. You leave doors unlocked, you grow careless, you assume the walls will defend you forever. And so, when danger comes, it doesn't need to break the fortress. It only needs to slip through the cracks you ignored. This is the redundancy paradox. The more protection you build, the more fragile you may become, because safety makes you assume you no longer need to be cautious. Think of how this works in daily life. A person installs the latest security system, dozens of cameras, alarms, and motion sensors. They feel invincible. But because they feel invincible, they stop locking the door. They stop checking windows. The layers of protection create a false comfort, and that false comfort is the real vulnerability. Or take someone who saves obsessively, building 3, 4, 5 backups of their important files. They stop checking whether the backups work. When disaster strikes, every copy is corrupted. The very act of overprotecting creates a blind spot. It shows up in health too. People take supplements, track their sleep, measure their heart rate, install apps to remind them to breathe. And because they rely so heavily on these systems, they stop listening to their own bodies. They ignore the warning signs because the numbers on the screen tell them everything is fine. Overprotection becomes a lullaby, and in that lullaby, danger grows silently. History is full of examples. The Titanic was called unsinkable, layered with watertight compartments and advanced design. That belief in redundancy allowed arrogance. Lifeboats were reduced, safety drills ignored. And when the iceberg came, the illusion of overprotection became the reason so many lives were lost. Or consider ancient empires building walls around their cities. The stronger the wall, the more complacent the citizens became, never imagining enemies could tunnel under, poison the wells, or wait for starvation to do the work. Redundancy creates blindness. The redundancy paradox reveals a deeper truth. Security does not always make us safer. Sometimes it makes us weaker. When we trust the system more than we trust awareness, we hand our survival over to the very structures meant to protect us. And when those structures fail, as all things eventually do, we are left defenseless. Psychologically, this is the same pattern as in relationships or personal growth. Someone who tries too hard to guarantee stability often strangles the very thing they want to preserve. A partner who constantly tests loyalty may drive love away. A parent who shelters a child from every risk may raise someone fragile, unable to withstand the smallest hardship. The attempt to eliminate danger creates a life unprepared for it. Here lies the haunting irony. The redundancy paradox doesn't just make you vulnerable, it convinces you that you're not. And that illusion is the most dangerous state of all. A soldier who believes he is invincible doesn't dodge arrows. A society that believes it is unbreakable doesn't prepare for collapse. A person who believes nothing can go wrong stops noticing when everything is already cracking. So what's the way out? It is not to reject protection but to remain awake inside it. To understand that no wall, no system, no layer of defense is ever perfect. True safety is not redundancy. True safety is vigilance, humility, the awareness that security is temporary. The paradox dissolves only when you refuse to fall asleep in the comfort of overprotection. The redundancy paradox whispers a warning. Every shield is also a blindfold if you stop looking. Every layer of safety becomes a trap if you mistake it for certainty. The stronger you think your walls are, the less you notice the cracks. And it is through those cracks, not the walls themselves, that the world breaks you. Containment failure gate. Imagine a gate. Not the wood and iron you see in a field, but the kind of gate that lives in the mind, the idea of a boundary, a line drawn to separate what is allowed from what is forbidden. At first, the boundary feels protective. You tell yourself, this wall will keep danger out, this rule will keep chaos contained, this structure will keep order intact. But here is the paradox. Every time you build a boundary, you also create the concept of crossing it. Every wall suggests a breach. Every locked door whispers of being opened. Every gate teaches the world how to fail. This is the containment failure gate, the strange truth that defining limits makes their violation not only possible, but inevitable. History is full of these illusions of safety. The Great Wall of China stretched for thousands of miles, meant to be impenetrable. Yet in practice, the wall didn't stop invasions, it only redirected them, or worse, invited betrayal from within. Castles in Europe were built with moats, high towers, murder holes. They promised safety, but once siege weapons evolved to counter them, those very features became predictable weaknesses. The stronger the fortification, the more it revealed where to strike. The act of defining protection outlined its own destruction. Think of law. The moment a rule is written, people search for loopholes. Defining what is forbidden automatically defines the shape of what can be exploited. Tell a child, do not press this button, and the very act of pointing out the button makes it irresistible. Tell society, this border cannot be crossed, and suddenly the border becomes the most contested place on earth. Boundaries summon trespassers, not because they are weak, but because they are visible. The same thing unfolds in technology. Security systems are built to contain threats. Firewalls, passwords, encryption, each one designed as a gate. But every gate invites a test. Hackers do not need to invent danger out of thin air. The boundaries themselves map the routes to attack. The password suggests cracking. The firewall suggests tunneling. The encryption suggests decoding. Without the walls, there would be no siege. Containment creates its own failure. Psychology mirrors this perfectly. People build boundaries inside themselves. I must not think of this. I will not feel that. I will not cross into this territory of the mind. Yet by defining the boundary, the mind becomes obsessed. The forbidden thought circles closer, the repressed emotion swells in strength. By trying to lock it away, you feed it. The very definition of the limit is the invitation for the breach. It is why taboos persist so powerfully. What is unnamed can be ignored. What is forbidden becomes magnetic. Even nature shows us the same paradox. Dams are built to contain rivers, to hold back floods. But dams also create the potential for catastrophic failure. Without the dam, the river flows freely, sometimes dangerously but predictably. With the dam, the pressure builds. If the gate fails, the destruction is magnified 100-fold. Boundaries turn ordinary forces into explosive ones, and the breach becomes inevitable over time. Why does this happen? Because boundaries pretend at permanence, but nothing in reality is permanent. Everything leaks, everything decays, everything erodes. A gate is not simply a line. It is a test. Once defined, it demands to be crossed. And the more energy you pour into maintaining it, the more violent its eventual failure becomes. The gate does not just fail, it teaches others how to breach it again and again. This is why the idea unsettles us. Containment is supposed to be safety. But in truth, containment guarantees its own end. You cannot seal chaos forever, because the seal itself creates pressure, attention, desire. The wall does not erase the enemy, it sharpens their intent. The rule does not erase the desire, it deepens the craving. The gate does not erase the possibility of crossing, it engraves it into the imagination. Think of your own life. Boundaries you swore would never be crossed, relationships, habits, fears. I will never go back to them. I will never repeat this mistake. I will never break this promise. Yet in defining the limit so absolutely, you created its breach. And when the breach came, it felt inevitable. Because the truth is, the containment failure gate lives inside us as much as outside. So the next time you draw a line, build a wall, or close a gate, remember, you are not only creating safety, you are also creating its shadow. Every limit carries its own undoing. Every fortress dreams of collapse. And sometimes, the act of containing is what ensures the breach will come. Precision drift. Imagine tightening your focus on a target. You measure, adjust, refine. Every input, every correction, sharper than the last. The closer you chase perfection, the more certain you become that your aim must land true. But then the arrow flies wide. The more exact you try to be, the less accurate the outcome becomes. This is precision drift, the paradox where obsessive exactness causes failure, where refinement dissolves reliability, and where the pursuit of flawless input corrupts the result. At first, it feels impossible. Shouldn't greater precision bring you closer to truth? Shouldn't more detail, more control, mean less error? And yet systems, whether physical, mechanical, or human, often rebel against overcorrection. A pilot oversteering an aircraft to hold a perfect line can cause turbulence. A musician obsessed with hitting every note exactly may strip the music of rhythm, leaving it lifeless. A marksman who adjusts too minutely for every gust of wind may end up missing entirely, while one who trusted the larger arc of instinct might have struck the target. Precision drift emerges because no system is free of noise. The world is imperfect, shifting, alive. The tighter your grip, the more those small fluctuations amplify. Instead of clarity, you invite chaos. Like trying to balance a pencil on its tip by making constant micro-adjustments, your very precision guarantees collapse. Think of science. Measurements taken to extreme decimal points sometimes introduce more error, not less, because instruments have limits. Push them too far and the precision becomes illusion, false accuracy born of overextension. Or think of conversation. Someone insists on perfect wording, dissecting every phrase, every tone, until the meaning itself drifts away. Exactness here doesn't clarify, it alienates, leaving the truth further than before. In daily life, precision drift is the reason overplanning often fails. You script every hour, predict every outcome, build a flawless plan, but the moment reality shifts even slightly, the rigidity cracks. Instead of flowing with the unexpected, your structure collapses. In aiming for exact control, you drift further from success than if you had left room for imperfection. This paradox is ancient. Archers in Zen practice were taught not to try to hit the target, but to release without clinging. The more they fixated, the further the arrow strayed. True accuracy came not from micro-precision, but from balance between effort and surrender. The drift dissolves when you stop strangling the outcome. And there is something unsettling here too. If more precision can create less accuracy, then perhaps truth itself is not hiding in the decimals, but in the spaces between. Perhaps the universe resists being pinned down too tightly, as if saying, look too closely, and you will miss the whole. The danger of precision drift is that it feels rational. The impulse is natural. If you miss, aim harder, refine more, control tighter. But the trap is hidden in the spiral. Each added correction pushes you further from what you sought, until you are no longer even aiming at the target, but at your own obsession with being exact. So the next time you find yourself tightening the grip, adding one more adjustment, forcing perfection on a system too alive to be still, pause. Ask whether the pursuit of exactness is carrying you closer or drifting you further. Because sometimes the straightest path is not the narrowest one. Sometimes, the more precise you try to be, the less true you become. Chain reaction loop. Picture a row of dominoes standing in perfect sequence. You touch the first one, and the fall begins. Each piece strikes the next, each step follows inevitably, until the line collapses in one continuous motion. This is how we imagine logic should work. Cause leading to effect, step leading to conclusion. But sometimes, the final domino does not rest at the end. Instead, it circles back and strikes the first, starting the process over again. Suddenly, you are caught inside a chain reaction loop, where each logical step does not resolve but undoes itself, forcing the cycle to begin again. At first it feels reasonable. You make a decision, and it seems justified. That decision triggers a consequence, which leads to another choice. The choices follow one another cleanly, like dominoes falling in order. But then, at the end, the result points back to the beginning, negating it, undoing it, demanding the process restart. You thought you were moving forward, but you were only moving in circles. Consider the classic example. You prepare for an exam by studying late into the night. You lose sleep, and in doing so, your memory falters. The very action meant to ensure success plants the seed of failure. Or you decide to be cautious with money, so you hoard it tightly, never spending, never investing. But in your attempt to protect your wealth, you miss opportunities to grow it, and the very act of caution leaves you poorer. The chain reaction undoes itself, logic collapsing into its own contradiction. The most chilling part is that it does not always happen instantly. Sometimes the loop hides itself, unfolding slowly, step by step, until the moment of inversion strikes. A leader enforces strict rules to maintain order. At first, society stabilizes. But as the rules tighten, rebellion grows, chaos spreads, and the original purpose, order, is undone by the very logic that sought to preserve it. A person seeks absolute freedom, cutting ties, ignoring obligations, rejecting constraints. Yet in doing so, they end up isolated, bound by loneliness, trapped in a cage of their own making. The chain reaction loop turns intentions into their own undoing. Why does this happen? Because logic, while precise, is blind to extremes. Every principle, when pushed far enough, circles back on itself. Caution becomes paralysis. Freedom becomes isolation. Love becomes obsession. Security becomes suffocation. The loop is born not because logic is wrong, but because logic, unchecked, curves back until it consumes its own foundation. There is a strange inevitability in this. The loop feels mechanical, automatic, as if the steps cannot be stopped once set in motion. And in many ways, they can't. Once fear breeds control, control breeds rebellion, and rebellion breeds fear again. The circle sustains itself. The harder you fight against it, the more energy you feed into its turning. The chain reaction loop is not just a cycle of thought. It is a cycle of consequence, each step reinforcing the next until it returns to the beginning. But perhaps the most unsettling part is how seductive it feels. When you are inside the loop, each step seems rational. Each decision makes sense in the moment. You study to succeed, you save to protect, you love to nurture, you control to preserve. There is no single wrong step. The wrongness lies in the sequence as a whole, in the way each action folds back onto itself. The loop is invisible because it is made of good intentions, strung together until they devour themselves. History is littered with these loops. Empires expand to secure themselves, but expansion breeds enemies, and enemies collapse the empire. Technologies are invented to make life easier, but their very convenience leads to dependence, and dependence strips away the freedom they promised. Individuals build walls to feel safe, but the walls trap them inside, suffocating the very security they were meant to provide. Each is a chain reaction loop, spiraling until its own logic destroys itself. So how do you escape? The only way is to see the circle before it closes. To recognize when your actions are feeding the very outcome you fear. To step away from the sequence before it loops back to the start. Sometimes it means breaking the chain deliberately, refusing the next logical step, even when it feels natural. Sometimes it means accepting imperfection instead of chasing flawless control. Sometimes it means letting go instead of holding tighter. The loop can only continue if every domino falls. Remove one, and the sequence ends. Still, there is a deeper lesson hidden in the trap. The chain reaction loop reveals that life resists absolute certainty. That every system, every principle, every plan has a breaking point where it turns into its own undoing. It reminds us that balance is fragile, that pursuit carried too far becomes destruction. It is not the first step that matters, nor the last. It is the circle they form together. Imagine feeling the weight of such a loop in your own life. The endless cycles of overthinking that produce confusion instead of clarity. The endless cycles of caution that create risk instead of safety. The endless cycles of control that spiral into chaos. You begin to see that the trap is not just theoretical, it is woven into the very patterns of human behavior. So the next time you feel yourself moving logically, step by step, pause and ask, where does this sequence lead? Does it resolve, or does it return? Does the last step open a new path, or does it strike the first, beginning the cycle again? Because the truth is, not all logic leads forward. Some logic only leads back, endlessly repeating, undoing itself with each turn. Because some traps do not chain you from outside. They make you build the chain yourself, link by link, until the circle is complete and you are locked inside the loop. Data contradiction gate. Imagine sifting through evidence, graphs, numbers, and studies, each one carrying the weight of certainty. You expect clarity, a straight line from premise to conclusion. But instead, you find two sets of data, both proven beyond doubt, both precise, both undeniable, and yet they contradict each other. One declares the world is one way, the other insists it is the opposite. They cannot both be true, and yet here they stand, demanding recognition. This is the data contradiction gate, the doorway that opens only when you accept that conflicting truths must coexist. At first, your instinct is to choose. Surely one must be flawed, one miscalculated, one corrupted. That's the safe comfort of logic. Eliminate error until only truth remains. But what happens when you find no error? When peer review, replication, and rigor confirm that both data sets hold. You stand before a paradox, and the ordinary tools of reason fail. The gate will not open if you discard one truth for the other. It opens only when you accept both. This is not fantasy, it has already happened. In physics, light behaves as both wave and particle. Two datasets, two realities, both proven in experiment. To cling to one and deny the other is to miss the deeper truth. Light is not wave or particle, it is something larger, something that manifests as both depending on how you ask the question. The contradiction is not failure, it is doorway. Or consider cosmology. Data tells us the universe expands endlessly, galaxies racing away faster and faster. Other data insists that gravity must eventually pull it back, collapsing in a great crunch. Both models carry evidence, both stand on mathematics, both echo truth. The contradiction forces us to widen our imagination. Maybe the universe both expands and collapses, oscillating in cycles we can barely perceive. The gate opens not by choosing one, but by embracing the tension of both. Even in human science, contradiction reigns. One study proves memory is malleable, fragile, constantly rewritten. Another proves memory is enduring, unshakable, haunting us for decades. Which is correct? Both. Memory is stable and unstable, reliable and unreliable, depending on the frame you use. The contradiction is not a flaw, it is the fingerprint of complexity. Philosophically, this shakes us. We long for singular truths, for a world where one fact cancels its opposite. But the data contradiction gate refuses such simplicity. It forces us to step into a reality where opposites stand side by side, not as enemies but as mirrors. Each truth defines the other. Each truth requires the other. In the space between them lies the deeper reality, the one logic alone cannot grasp. Psychologically, this is uncomfortable. The human brain craves coherence. Contradiction sparks anxiety, cognitive dissonance. But what if dissonance itself is the sound of the gate unlocking? What if the tension we feel when holding two truths is the very force that opens us to new understanding? To live inside contradiction is to stretch beyond comfort into wisdom. Religions and philosophies have long known this. In Taoism, the Tao is both being and non-being. In Christianity, Christ is both fully human and fully divine. In Buddhism, the self both exists and does not exist. These are not errors of doctrine, they are data contradiction gates, truths revealed only when opposites are held together. The paradox is not weakness, it is the key. So what does it mean for you? It means that when you encounter conflict, when you face two truths that cannot reconcile, do not rush to discard one. Pause. Hold them both. Let them shape you. The contradiction gate does not demand certainty, it demands surrender to complexity. The universe is not either/or. It is both/and. And in that moment, when you allow both proven truths to stand, something shifts. The lock clicks. The gate opens. You glimpse a deeper reality, one too vast to fit inside a single dataset, too infinite to be reduced to one side of a contradiction. Because the greatest truths are not singular, they are symphonies. And only when you let conflicting notes ring together do you hear the music that lies beyond logic. Retroactive causality key. Imagine holding a key in your hand. You don't remember picking it up. You don't even remember owning it. Yet there it is, solid, cold, waiting. You slide it into a lock, and only then do you realize that its existence makes sense. The effect, the door opening, creates the memory of the cause, the key. This is the retroactive causality key, a logic so strange and unsettling that it flips our understanding of time itself. Instead of causes birthing effects, here the effect retroactively decides the cause, rewriting the path backward so that the story always makes sense after the fact. Think of how it feels in ordinary life. You meet someone by chance, and years later, they become central to your story. You look back and say, "It was destiny that we met that day." But that isn't how it happened. At the time, it was random, meaningless. Only the later effect rewrote the cause, making the past appear inevitable. Or imagine applying for a job on a whim, barely considering it. Later, that job shapes your life forever. Suddenly, the moment of applying feels monumental. But it wasn't at the time. The future reached back and rewrote the importance of that moment. This is the eerie nature of retroactive causality. The arrow of time bends. We like to believe life moves in a straight line. First action, then reaction, first cause, then effect. But what if time works like a loop? What if the outcome you experience today reaches back and reshapes yesterday, giving weight to events that meant nothing until they bore fruit? Philosophy has wrestled with this for centuries. Post hoc reasoning, the skeptics call it, the fallacy of assuming cause because of effect. But what if it's not just a fallacy? What if the universe itself is structured this way? Effects pulling causes into existence, rewriting history so that the chain of events always feels coherent, even though it is built backward. Think of prophecy stories in myth and religion. A vision of the future appears, and because people act to prevent it, they cause the very events that fulfill it. The effect, the prophecy's fulfillment, creates the cause. Or think of science fiction, the time traveler who hands an inventor the plans for a machine that hasn't been built yet. The machine exists because the plans exist, but the plans exist only because the machine already does. Cause and effect collapse into one another, each giving birth to the other. But it is not only in myth. In psychology, this happens every day. The human brain is wired to impose meaning backward. Something traumatic happens, and suddenly, every earlier sign feels like a warning. Something joyful happens, and every earlier accident feels like fate leading you there. The event determines the narrative, not the other way around. The effect writes the cause. The retroactive causality key is terrifying because it suggests that our lives are not built step by step, but rewritten in reverse. That we are not moving forward through time, but constantly editing our past to fit the present. Every decision, every moment of chance, becomes important only after the fact, when the outcome assigns it meaning. Until then, the cause doesn't matter. It doesn't even exist in a meaningful way. Here lies the haunting possibility. What if some causes never existed until you looked for them? What if memory itself is constructed this way, shaped by the effect of who you are now? The childhood memory that feels like it shaped you. Did it actually shape you, or did your present self reach back and sculpt it to make sense of your story? The key exists because the lock was opened, not the other way around. So the next time you find yourself staring at a turning point in your life, wondering how it all began, ask yourself, are you remembering the true cause, or are you holding the retroactive causality key, an effect that reached backward, planting its own cause in the soil of your past? Because if this key exists, then nothing is truly linear, nothing is truly certain. The door you open today may already be rewriting the reasons why you opened it yesterday. Probability flip. Imagine a dice roll. The odds say failure is rare, 1 chance in 100, 1 in 1,000. You tell yourself it almost never happens. You relax into the comfort of probability, convinced the system shields you. But here is the paradox. The very structure designed to prevent the rare outcome is what makes it inevitable. This is the probability flip, when the unlikely, by sheer repetition and design, becomes not just possible but guaranteed. Think of air travel. Every mechanism is engineered for safety, redundant systems, constant checks, layers upon layers of protection. Each piece exists to make disaster statistically rare. But the more layers you build, the more points of failure exist. Rare accidents are not abolished, they are deferred. And with enough time, enough flights, enough moving parts, the rare becomes certain. Probability folds in on itself. What is almost impossible in one moment becomes inevitable over years. Or look at nuclear power plants. The systems are designed to prevent meltdown at all costs. Dozens of backups, emergency protocols, containment vessels. Yet precisely because of this complexity, unforeseen chains of failure emerge. Each safety layer multiplies the ways disaster can cascade. Chernobyl. Fukushima. Not frequent, but unavoidable given enough time. The rare outcome the system exists to forbid is the very one it guarantees in the long arc. It happens in everyday life, too. Consider medicine. Antibiotics are designed to eliminate infection. But mass use, meant to reduce risk, reshapes bacteria. Resistant strains emerge. The more the system prevents disease, the more it guarantees superbugs. Or consider cybersecurity. Firewalls, encryption, constant patching, all built to prevent breach. Yet every new defense teaches hackers how to outmaneuver it. The system intended to secure the network breeds the expertise to break it. Psychology shows the same pattern. A person builds elaborate habits to prevent failure. Checklists, routines, rigid schedules. At first, they succeed. But over time, the pressure grows. They miss one step, and the entire structure collapses. What was meant to prevent chaos produces it in sharper form. Or take social rules. A community bans certain speech to preserve order. The ban itself breeds obsession, taboo, and eventual rebellion. The rare act, what almost no one thought to do, becomes the one thing everyone cannot stop thinking about. The mathematics of the probability flip are merciless. Even when a chance is 1 in a million, if you roll the dice billions of times, the outcome will appear. Safety systems reduce risk per instance, but amplify it across scale and time. The larger the network, the more certain the anomaly. One rare spark is inevitable when billions of circuits flow with current. One breach is inevitable when trillions of passwords are typed. The rare is not rare at all. It is scheduled, only waiting its turn. And that is why the probability flip is so unsettling. It exposes the fragility of the structures we trust most. We believe in safety because risk is low per attempt. We forget that repetition is the enemy. Rare outcomes need only patience. What feels impossible today is already guaranteed tomorrow. This truth has haunted history. Titanic was unsinkable, until its first voyage proved otherwise. Banks built to withstand collapse instead collapse under the weight of protections that create false security. Spacecraft engineered with failsafes still explode, because every safeguard is another variable waiting to align with failure. Each system becomes a clock, ticking toward the anomaly it swore to forbid. But the deepest twist is this: the more we try to prevent the rare, the more we summon it. Safety creates complacency. Complacency multiplies exposure. The belief that disaster cannot happen is precisely what ensures it does. The probability flip is not just about numbers, it is about psychology. The guardrails lull us into leaning harder, until the fall is inevitable. So the next time you hear that something is nearly impossible, remember, impossibility and inevitability are not opposites. They are twins joined by time. The rare event is not avoided by the system, it is birthed by it. All we do when we build structures of prevention is set the stage for the one breach that must eventually arrive. And when it comes, we act surprised, as though probability betrayed us. But the betrayal was written into the system from the beginning. The dice were always going to land on their edge, given enough throws. Recursive exception. Imagine a rule written to bring order. Clear, sharp, absolute. For a while, it works. But then life, being larger than any law, pushes against its edges. An exception is carved. The rule applies, except here. At first, it feels harmless, even necessary. But soon the exception itself creates confusion, and so another rule is written to govern it. That new rule spawns its own loophole, which demands its own amendment, and on it spirals. What began as a single law becomes a labyrinth. This is recursive exception, a system that endlessly multiplies its own contradictions, collapsing under the weight of its self-repair. You see it everywhere once you know how to look. In bureaucracy, a form requires a signature, except when the signer is absent, except when an alternate has authority, except when that authority conflicts with another office. In the end, the paper sits idle, trapped in rules meant to move it forward. In software, one bug is patched with a line of code, which creates a new bug, which requires another patch, until the program is less a design than a tangle of exceptions pretending to hold together. Even language itself obeys this drift. Every grammar rule we learn comes with its list of exceptions, each of which eventually requires its own pattern. The more rules we make, the more fragile the structure becomes. Recursive exception is a kind of cancer of order. It grows not because of chaos, but because of our obsession with control. We believe we can perfect a system by covering every gap, by writing rules for every possible condition. But life is not static. It mutates. And every time it mutates, the system mutates too, until it no longer resembles the simplicity that birthed it. The order we sought has become noise. History is thick with examples. Legal codes so bloated with exceptions that even judges cannot interpret them consistently. Religious laws that multiply into hundreds of contradictory rules until faith itself drowns in technicality. Empires buried under their own regulations, unable to act quickly because every decision required navigating a web of self-made exceptions. What began as clarity became paralysis. And the deeper terror is this: recursive exception never ends on its own. It feeds on itself, turning every solution into a problem, every problem into another exception. The system cannot collapse outright, because each patch keeps it staggering forward. It does not die, it decays in slow motion, trapping those within it in an endless cycle of adjustment, amendment, and contradiction. But there is a hidden lesson buried here. Systems that survive are not the ones that patch every hole. They are the ones that allow holes to exist, that bend instead of sealing every crack. In nature, life adapts not by writing new rules for every mutation, but by letting some rules break, letting randomness play its part. In human life too, freedom lies not in total order, but in space for disorder. Still, the haunting question remains: how many of our daily structures, our governments, our technologies, even our personal habits, are already caught in recursive exception, so tangled that no one remembers the original rule? How much of what we call order is simply the illusion of stability built on a maze of contradictions? So the next time you find yourself adding another exception, another amendment, another patch to hold things together, pause. Ask whether you are solving a problem or feeding the loop. Because some systems don't collapse with a crash, they collapse by recursion, endlessly rewriting themselves until no one can tell the difference between the rule and the exception that devoured it. Logical blind spot mask. We are taught to trust logic, to believe that if the premises are sound and the steps are careful, the conclusion must be true. Logic promises clarity, order, certainty. But what happens when the very structure of logic hides its own weakness? When the reasoning feels flawless only because the most important variables have been erased, omitted, masked. You follow the argument step by step, convinced it is airtight, only to realize later that the truth was never missing in the conclusion, it was missing at the start. This is the logical blind spot mask, the trap where what you don't see is precisely what controls the outcome. It begins simply. A problem is presented, the pieces laid out cleanly, the choices narrowed into neat categories. You are told, if A then B. If not A, then C. The equation seems complete, the reasoning elegant. But hidden behind the structure is what was left out, the messy, inconvenient, unpredictable variables that do not fit the tidy design. They are pushed aside, ignored, disguised. And so, while you focus on the steps in front of you, the real answer is lost behind the mask. Consider the examples around us. A company projects growth by calculating sales, costs, and profit margins. The numbers line up, the math is flawless. Yet the model collapses because it never accounted for sudden market shifts, changing human behavior, or the fragile psychology of customers. The logic was perfect, but only because the chaos of reality was erased. Or imagine a relationship where one person convinces themselves that love is measurable through time spent together or words exchanged. The reasoning feels logical. More time equals more love. But it ignores the variables of presence, trust, emotional depth. The blind spot hides the truth, and the mask convinces you the equation is complete. The danger lies in how seductive the mask can be. Because once something is framed logically, we want to believe it. We relax into the comfort of structure, trusting the steps as though they were law. But structure without substance is only illusion. A masked equation is not clarity, it is deception. And yet the mind craves it, because uncertainty is unbearable. Better a flawed equation that feels complete than an endless web of factors that can never be fully resolved. History is filled with tragedies born from blind spot masks. Economists who reduced nations to numbers, ignoring the human suffering behind them. Leaders who justified wars with clean arguments that omitted the real costs of blood and grief. Scientists who declared conclusions from limited data, dismissing inconvenient evidence until reality forced itself into view. Each thought they were following reason. Each was guided not by truth, but by the shadow of omission. And the mask is not always placed by others. Often, we wear it ourselves. We make choices by simplifying problems, stripping away the messy truths we don't want to face. Should I stay in this job or leave? The equation might balance salary against risk, but omit the deeper variable of happiness. Should I stay in this relationship or end it? The equation might weigh history against possibility, but erase the variable of respect. We blind ourselves, not because we cannot see, but because seeing too much makes the decision unbearable. The mask is comfort, a way to hide from what matters most. The most chilling aspect is how invisible the mask can be. You never notice what you don't include. You never see the variable you've erased. The logic feels solid precisely because the blind spot is hidden from sight. This is why the trap is so powerful. It does not attack logic from outside. It works from within, convincing you that incompleteness is completeness, that absence is order. But there is also a strange lesson in it. The mask reminds us that every argument, every plan, every decision is partial. That what is left out matters as much as what is left in. It teaches humility, the recognition that no logic is ever total, no reasoning ever free from omission. To see the blind spot is to accept that knowledge is never whole. And yet, even knowing this, we fall into the trap again and again. Because life demands decisions, and decisions demand simplicity. We cannot live drowning in every variable, so we reduce, compress, ignore. The blind spot mask is not just imposed on us, it is built into the way we survive. But survival has a cost, and sometimes that cost is truth. Imagine standing in front of a mirror that reflects everything except what you most need to see. You look at yourself and feel the image is complete, yet one detail is missing, erased so perfectly that you forget it was ever there. That is the blind spot mask, a reflection that feels whole but is carved by omission. And the longer you stare, the more convinced you become that what is missing never mattered at all. So the next time an argument feels flawless, pause. Ask not only what it includes, but what it ignores. Ask what variables have been dismissed because they were inconvenient, unmeasurable, uncomfortable. Because truth does not always hide in the steps you see. More often, it hides in the ones you were never allowed to count. Because some traps do not work by deceiving your reason. They work by blinding it, covering the variables that matter most, until the mask of logic feels more convincing than the truth itself. Overload trigger. Imagine standing before a river of information. It rushes past you, endless, unstoppable, shimmering with facts, numbers, words, images. At first you try to drink from it. A little here, a little there, enough to quench your thirst for answers. But then the current grows heavier, faster, until you are no longer drinking, you are drowning. This is the overload trigger, the moment when data becomes too vast to process, when the sheer flood of input makes a correct output impossible. We like to believe more information equals more clarity. If we just gather enough evidence, enough detail, enough proof, we will know the truth. But the paradox of the overload trigger is that excess information doesn't sharpen reality, it blurs it. Imagine trying to see a painting by pressing your face against the canvas. Every detail is visible, every stroke overwhelming, yet the image disappears. The whole collapses under the weight of its parts. Think of decision-making. A person faced with 3 choices can compare them, weigh pros and cons, act decisively. Give them 30 choices, and paralysis sets in. The brain cycles endlessly, trying to calculate every possibility, and in that spinning, no answer emerges. This is the overload trigger in daily life. Too much data creates the illusion of intelligence while erasing the possibility of wisdom. History offers stark examples. Military leaders overwhelmed by contradictory reports lose the battle, not because the truth was absent, but because too much truth made them blind. Financial markets collapse under torrents of data where every signal is drowned in noise. Even scientists, faced with billions of data points, must filter and cut, or else the correct pattern is buried under infinite possibility. The overload trigger shows us that more is not always better. Beyond a threshold, more means nothing. Psychologically, the overload trigger is devastating. Our minds evolved for simplicity. Small groups, visible dangers, limited decisions. Drop a modern human into a storm of feeds, alerts, statistics, studies, and opinions, and the brain reacts as if under attack. Anxiety rises, confidence collapses, certainty vanishes. Too much data doesn't just block clarity, it destroys trust in one's own ability to choose. The mind becomes a machine stuck in infinite loops, spitting out hesitation instead of truth. Philosophy has always warned us of this. The ancient Greeks spoke of plethora, too much, which becomes as dangerous as too little. Taoist thinkers taught that adding endlessly only obscures the way. Even in religion, there is a pattern. Wisdom comes not from endless words, but from silence, from subtraction. The overload trigger is not a modern invention of technology. It is a timeless trap of excess, reappearing whenever humans confuse accumulation with understanding. But there is another dimension, more unsettling. What if the overload trigger is not a bug, but a design? In complex systems, flooding the channels with too much data ensures collapse, ensures paralysis. A society overwhelmed with information cannot act. An individual drowning in facts cannot decide. In that sense, the overload trigger becomes not just a psychological effect but a tool of control. Drown someone in 10,000 truths, and they will never find the one truth that matters. And yet, there is also a strange gift hidden inside the overload trigger. When correct output becomes impossible, when reason short-circuits under too much input, something else emerges. Intuition. Instinct. The quiet whisper that rises only when logic collapses. In the face of infinite noise, sometimes the only way forward is to stop calculating and simply act. The overload trigger, then, is not just a trap, it is a threshold. It forces you to step beyond logic, into something older, something deeper. So what should you do when the flood rises? You can't dam the river completely. You can't stop the world from producing more data. But you can choose how to drink. You can choose to step back, to filter, to let go of the illusion that total information equals total truth. The correct output is not hidden in the infinite, it is born from knowing what to ignore. The overload trigger is a warning, but also a mirror. It shows us that the human mind is not infinite, and that wisdom does not come from gathering everything, but from discerning what matters. To resist it is to cling to drowning. To accept it is to learn how to breathe again. And when you realize this, you understand, the world doesn't reward those who know the most. It rewards those who can see through the storm, those who can close their eyes to the flood and find the single thread that leads forward. Because the overload trigger is not the end of clarity. It is the moment you must choose what clarity truly means. Distributed paradox gate. Imagine walking through a great hall of doors. Each one glows with light, each one carved with inscriptions that promise truth. You step through the first door, and the world inside tells you, beyond doubt, that this is reality. It is whole, coherent, and self-consistent. But then you open another door, and inside you find a different truth, equally whole, equally convincing, yet directly contradicting the first. And then another door, and another world. Each system proving itself flawless from within, yet collapsing when compared to the others. This is the distributed paradox gate, the terrifying possibility that multiple truths can coexist, complete within themselves, but mutually exclusive when placed side by side. We like to think truth is singular, like a solid pillar that holds the universe upright. But the gate shows us otherwise. Logic itself can fracture into parallel systems, each airtight, each valid, each inescapable, and yet all pointing in opposite directions. It is like stepping into a courtroom with two judges, both applying perfect reasoning, both following their own laws flawlessly, yet one declares you innocent, the other condemns you to death. Who is right? Both. Who is wrong? Both. That's the contradiction. Consider mathematics. Within Euclidean geometry, the shortest path between 2 points is always a straight line. But in non-Euclidean geometry, on a curved surface like a sphere, that's no longer true. Both systems are perfectly logical, perfectly self-consistent, and yet their truths cannot be reconciled. The line is straight, and the line is not straight, depending on which world you stand in. The distributed paradox gate isn't fantasy, it's the foundation of the sciences we use every day. Or think of philosophy and belief systems. One worldview claims humans are free, that choice shapes destiny. Another claims everything is predetermined, that freedom is an illusion. Each system builds on itself, collects evidence, and reinforces its logic. Within its walls, it cannot be disproven. But when placed together, they contradict absolutely. Are we free? Are we not? The gate opens both doors, and both answers demand allegiance. Even daily life reflects this paradox. In one system, law, you may be guilty, judged by rules and precedent. In another system, morality, you may be innocent, judged by intent and circumstance. Both judgments are true, and yet they cannot live in the same room without tearing each other apart. The contradiction is not weakness. It is a reminder that truth is not a single line, it is a network of gates, each leading somewhere different, none yielding to the others. The most disturbing part of the distributed paradox gate is not the contradictions themselves, but what they imply, that truth might not be universal, that the structure of reality could shift depending on the system you inhabit. One gate says life is random. Another gate says it is fated. Another gate says it is an illusion. Each is internally flawless. Each collapses the others. And yet, when you stand at the center, you realize all the gates are open at once. How do we live in such a hall? Most people pick one door and pretend the others don't exist. They live inside one truth, comfortable in its coherence, refusing to look at the contradictions beyond the frame. But the gate waits. It reminds us that certainty is only a room we've chosen, not the only room that exists. The brave, or the haunted, step back into the hall, hearing the voices of all truths shouting at once. That is where madness begins, but also where wisdom hides. Because maybe the lesson of the gate is not to choose one truth and silence the rest, but to accept that contradictions are woven into the structure of existence. That reality itself is plural. That to live fully is to hold impossible truths together without collapsing under their weight. So when you find yourself at the threshold of the distributed paradox gate, don't be too quick to slam it shut. Look into the rooms. See the contradictions. Feel the discomfort. Because only in that discomfort will you glimpse the unsettling truth, that reality is not one door, but many, and each opens to a world that insists it alone is real. Feedback-proof loop. Imagine holding a piece of paper that declares itself true. No evidence, no external anchor, just a sentence that says, this statement is proof because it says it is. At first, it feels absurd, a word game with no weight. But then you notice how often the world runs on this pattern. Proof that circles back on itself. Validation that exists only because it names itself as valid. This is the feedback-proof loop, where certainty is built not on reality but on the echo of its own voice. Philosophy has wrestled with this for centuries. Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." On the surface, it feels like proof. But look closer. The thinking mind is proving itself by assuming its own existence. It is a loop. Or take the liar's paradox. This sentence is false. If it is true, it is false. If it is false, it is true. The loop closes in on itself, with no way to escape. Proof, or the illusion of it, is generated entirely by reference to itself. Religion and ideology lean on this mechanism too. The scripture is true because it says it is divinely inspired. We know it is divinely inspired because it is true. Circular, airtight, unbreakable from the inside. To the believer, the proof feels solid, because it does not rely on anything beyond itself. To the outsider, the circle is obvious. The feedback loop sustains belief not through external validation, but through self-enclosure. Science, though we like to imagine it immune, has its own mirrors. Peer review, replication, evidence, all essential. But sometimes, entire theories are shored up by referencing the assumptions they were built on. A model predicts an outcome, and when the outcome fits, it is used to validate the model, even though both rest on the same set of initial assumptions. It is not fraud, but a loop, the system proving itself by what it already assumed. Think of bureaucracies. A government issues an ID to prove your identity. But what proves the ID? Other documents issued by the same system. A passport proves your birth certificate, and your birth certificate proves your passport. The chain bends back on itself until the proof exists only because the system says so. No outside anchor, just recursive trust. Psychology lives in these loops too. A person tells themselves, "I am worthless because I feel worthless. I feel worthless because I am worthless." The feeling and the belief feed each other, making the loop airtight. Or its mirror, "I am capable because I believe in myself. I believe in myself because I am capable." The loop sustains, not because of outside validation, but because of internal repetition. Self-esteem and self-doubt both grow from the same circular soil. And think about technology today. Algorithms measure engagement. A post is valuable because the algorithm shows it to many. The algorithm shows it to many because it deems it valuable. Proof by circulation. The loop closes, and outsiders begin to believe the result is objective truth, when in fact it is only echo. The danger of the feedback proof loop is subtle. It feels convincing, because it is closed. Nothing can escape, nothing can contradict, because the circle allows only itself as evidence. It is a prison disguised as certainty. Once inside, you stop asking for outside validation, because the loop feels sufficient. And yet, this sufficiency is hollow. It is proof by echo, not by foundation. But here is the darker twist. Much of human life cannot escape these loops. Identity, belief, trust, even logic itself depend on recursive structures. We cannot prove logic without using logic. We cannot prove language without using language. The feedback loop is not just a flaw, it is the skeleton of thought. We live inside circles, some shallow, some profound, some dangerous. So what do we do? Perhaps the only answer is awareness. To know when proof is looping on itself. To recognize when certainty is nothing more than echo. To ask, does this belief lean on something outside itself, or is it standing in a hall of mirrors, reflecting endlessly until the illusion feels solid? The feedback proof loop is unsettling because it shows us how fragile truth can be. We crave certainty, but often the certainty we hold most tightly is built on nothing more than its own insistence. And yet, without such loops, we would have no ground to stand on at all. Proof exists, but often only because it whispers to itself, louder and louder, until we mistake the echo for reality. Perception-dependent logic. Imagine two people staring at the same event. The facts are identical, the sequence unchanged. Yet when each applies their reasoning, two different truths emerge. One swears the outcome is inevitable, the other insists it is impossible. Both argue with conviction, both supported by logic, yet their conclusions cannot coexist. This is perception-dependent logic, a framework where truth itself bends to the eyes that examine it, where reasoning does not reveal reality but reshapes it. First, it feels absurd. Logic is supposed to be objective, universal, immune to the quirks of perspective. But in practice, every chain of reasoning begins with assumptions, and assumptions are stitched from perception. If you believe the world is hostile, every fact arranges itself into proof of danger. If you believe it is kind, the same facts glow with reassurance. The logic is flawless each time, but it is anchored not to the event, but to the lens through which it is viewed. History is thick with such contradictions. Ancient omens read by priests, one saw an eclipse as doom, another as divine blessing. Courts of law where the same evidence convicts one man and frees another, depending on who weighs the testimony. Even science, our most disciplined pursuit of truth, bends under this paradox. One experimenter interpretation of results leads to revolution, another's to dismissal, though the numbers are the same. The perception shapes the logic shapes the truth. The danger is subtle but corrosive. Once truth becomes perception-dependent, certainty dissolves. Arguments stop being about facts and start being about lenses. Two sides hurl proofs at each other like stones, not realizing they are building on foundations invisible to the other. Each walks away convinced of victory, each more entrenched in their own truth. The logic is airtight, but the air it seals is not the same. You can feel it in daily life. A couple argues, each convinced they are rational. Each has their own version of events, their own interpretation of tone, intention, silence. The logic each builds is impeccable, but it is perception that decides the outcome, not reason. Or think of memory. Two siblings recall the same childhood event. One remembers warmth, the other remembers cruelty. Neither lies, but their truths cannot be reconciled, because perception is not neutral. It is a sculptor that carves reality into different forms. Philosophers warn that this paradox can consume societies. When perception-dependent logic dominates, consensus becomes nearly impossible. No shared truth can be found, because even the tools of reasoning bend under bias. And yet, there is also strange beauty here. It reminds us that reality is not a fixed wall, but a prism. Light passes through, and each eye sees a different color. Logic is not broken, it is refracted. But there is a darker possibility too. If truth shifts with perception, then those who control perception control reality. Propaganda, illusions, curated feeds, they do not need to alter the facts. They only need to bend the lens. Once the lens is set, the logic will obediently follow, and truth itself becomes pliable. So what do we do in the face of this paradox? Perhaps the only way forward is not to cling to a single, rigid truth, but to recognize the multiplicity, that logic is never free of the one who wields it. To step outside your own perception, to glimpse another's lens, is to realize that truth is larger than either frame. So the next time someone insists their logic is unshakable, pause. Ask what assumptions their reasoning rests upon. Ask what lens they are looking through. Because some truths are not found in the facts themselves, but in the eyes that judge them. And perception-dependent logic is the reminder, unsettling and humbling, that even the sharpest reasoning can never escape the gaze of the one who reasons. Assumption lock-in. Every argument begins with something taken for granted. A starting point, a foundation, a truth assumed so obvious it is never questioned. From that point, logic unfolds, clean, sharp, convincing. But what if the foundation itself is false? What if the bedrock premise is cracked? Then every step that follows, no matter how perfect, no matter how elegant, is flawed. This is the assumption lock-in. The trap of believing a conclusion is solid because the reasoning is flawless, when in fact the reasoning is chained to a false beginning. It is easy to miss because logic itself does not reveal the flaw. If the premises are wrong, the argument still looks neat. A house can be beautifully designed, every wall straight, every corner precise, yet if it is built on sand, it will crumble. The structure deceives you into trusting it, until reality exposes the weakness at its root. That is what makes assumption lock-in so dangerous. It hides in the very place we rarely look, the starting line. Consider an example. A company predicts its future profits. The numbers add up, the math is sound. But the assumption underneath is that demand will always grow. When demand collapses, every conclusion built on that assumption shatters. Or take a personal decision. Someone assumes happiness is tied only to money. From that assumption, every choice, career, relationships, priorities, follows logically. But because the premise itself is false, the life that emerges from it becomes hollow. Perfect logic, tragic outcome. The trap works because assumptions are invisible. They are not argued, they are declared. They wear the mask of truth so tightly that we no longer see them. Of course money is happiness. Of course safety means control. Of course success means comparison. These statements slip past scrutiny because they feel self-evident. And once they are accepted, every argument they spawn locks into place. You can debate details forever, but the foundation remains untouched, quietly shaping every conclusion. Philosophers have warned of this for centuries. Descartes tried to strip assumptions away, doubting everything until he reached what he thought was undeniable. I think, therefore I am. But even this can be questioned. What if thought does not prove selfhood, but only the existence of thought itself? The lock-in is nearly impossible to escape because every attempt to reason starts with something already assumed. There is no logic without premises, and no premise without faith in its truth. In daily life, the danger is subtle but constant. You assume your friend's silence means anger, and from that assumption you build resentment. You assume failure in one attempt means you are incapable, and from that you abandon the path entirely. You assume love must look a certain way, and from that you miss the love already around you. The lock-in narrows your world not by error in reasoning, but by error in what reasoning begins with. The most chilling part is how collective these assumptions can be. Entire cultures build themselves on shared premises, beliefs so ingrained they are invisible. Once, it was assumed the earth was the center of the universe. Once, it was assumed that kings ruled by divine right. Once, it was assumed that entire groups of people were less human than others. Each belief was logical in its time, supported by endless chains of reasoning. And yet, because the premise was false, all those chains led to error, oppression, tragedy. The lock-in is not just personal, it is civilizational. How do you break free? The first step is suspicion. To ask not only, is this conclusion valid? But, what is this conclusion built on? To interrogate the foundation rather than admire the structure. This is harder than it sounds. It requires doubting what feels obvious, questioning what feels natural, pulling back the mask of certainty. And it requires the courage to accept that if the premise falls, everything built on it must fall too. Few are willing to let their whole structure collapse. Most would rather live with a false foundation than face the void beneath it. But sometimes collapse is necessary. Sometimes the only way to escape the lock-in is to strip the premise away, to begin again from something truer, even if it feels smaller, weaker, less comforting. Progress, personal or collective, always begins with shattering an assumption. The earth is not the center. Kings are not divine. People are not property. Each new truth begins where the old premise is exposed as false. Still, the danger remains. For every false assumption we escape, another waits beneath it, unexamined, unquestioned. Perhaps there is no final freedom from the lock-in. Perhaps logic will always be chained to faith in something unseen. The best we can do is remain vigilant, to remember that every flawless argument might be nothing more than a perfect circle drawn on a flawed floor. So the next time a chain of reasoning feels unshakable, pause. Ask yourself, what is this built on? What premise is hiding beneath? And dare to imagine what happens if that premise crumbles. Because the truth may not lie in the conclusion at all. It may lie in the courage to tear away the mask at the very beginning. Because some traps do not fool you at the end. They fool you at the start. And once the assumption is locked in, every conclusion that follows is nothing but a shadow built on sand. Self-negating rule. Imagine a law written in bold letters. This rule must always be followed. At first, it sounds clear. Absolute. Binding. But then you realize, if the rule applies universally, it must also apply to itself. And the moment it does, it begins to crumble. For if a rule enforces itself, it must also allow itself to be broken. The very act of applying it makes it void. This is the paradox of the self-negating rule, a command whose existence destroys its own authority. It sounds abstract, almost like a puzzle, but self-negating rules haunt every corner of life. Consider the phrase, question everything. If you follow it, you must also question the rule itself. But if you question it and find it flawed, you must stop following it. And if you stop following it, then perhaps you should no longer question everything. The rule devours itself, leaving nothing but paradox in its place. Logic itself is littered with such traps. In mathematics, the liar's paradox whispers, this statement is false. If it is true, then it is false. If it is false, then it is true. The attempt to apply the rule of truth versus falsehood renders itself meaningless. In language, rules of grammar collapse when they outlaw the very sentences that describe them. In law, commands like, there shall be no rules, destroy themselves by their own enforcement. But the real power of the self-negating rule is not in riddles, it is in life. Think of morality. A parent tells a child, never disobey. But what if obedience itself leads to harm? To truly honor the spirit of morality, the child must break the rule. The act of following it exposes its flaw. Or consider politics, a government declares, we must tolerate everything. But tolerance of intolerance destroys tolerance itself. The more the rule is applied, the faster it erases its own foundation. Psychologically, self-negating rules mirror the human struggle with control. We create systems to manage chaos, then realize those systems often collapse when they turn inward. A perfectionist declares, I must never make mistakes. But the pressure of that rule guarantees mistakes will multiply. The rule enforces the very outcome it tried to prevent. Or an anxious mind says, I must stop worrying. The act of commanding stillness only intensifies the storm. In trying to obey the rule, you void it. Philosophers and mystics have long studied this paradox. Zen koans are full of self-negating rules. The only way to enlightenment is to stop seeking it. The moment you apply the rule, you cancel it. Yet, in the cancellation lies the lesson. The void is not error, it is the doorway. By showing us the collapse of rules, paradox forces us to step beyond them. Even in science, self-negating rules emerge at the edges of knowledge. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, for example, can be read as a warning. The more precisely you measure one aspect of reality, the more you erase the precision of the other. The act of applying the rule of measurement cancels its own completeness. Reality resists absolute rules, demanding contradiction instead. There is danger here, but also liberation. Danger, because self-negating rules can paralyze societies and minds. If every law collapses into contradiction, how do we act? But liberation, because these paradoxes remind us that absolutes are illusions. The world is not a machine that can be governed by perfect rules, it is a field of tensions, opposites, and exceptions. The void left behind is not emptiness, but possibility. So the next time you encounter a command, an idea, or even a thought that seems absolute, ask, does it survive its own weight? Can it apply to itself without collapse? If not, you've met a self-negating rule. And when you see it unravel, don't be afraid. Its failure is not chaos, it is invitation. Invitation to step beyond rigid logic, to recognize that truth often lies not in rules, but in the spaces where rules undo themselves. Because sometimes, the key to understanding is not in following the rule, but in watching it disappear the moment you try. Semantic collapse. Imagine you are in the middle of a debate. At first, the subject feels clear, the words precise, the ground stable beneath you. But then, slowly, almost invisibly, the meanings of those words begin to shift. A key term changes shade, then changes shape, until what was once certain has become slippery. By the time you notice, the argument isn't even about the same thing anymore. The foundation has dissolved beneath your feet, leaving only noise and confusion. This is semantic collapse, when definitions shift during argument until the entire topic mutates, leaving you trapped in a battle where victory and defeat no longer mean what they did at the start. It begins innocently. Two people argue about freedom. At first, one means freedom from government control, the other means freedom from poverty and need. The same word, freedom, two different worlds. The conversation spirals, neither realizing they are no longer speaking the same language. Soon, the debate grows heated, but it's not about freedom at all anymore. It's about power, morality, economics. The word has collapsed, its meaning fractured under pressure. This happens everywhere. Politicians use it as a weapon. They redefine terms mid-sentence so that their promise is always true, their failures always excused. Security means one thing during election season and another when policies fail. Justice shifts depending on who is speaking, stretching until it means punishment for some and protection for others. Semantic collapse allows contradiction to masquerade as coherence. Even in personal relationships, the collapse takes hold. A couple argues about respect. One means listening without interruption. The other means unquestioning agreement. Both believe they are right, but neither is arguing about the same thing anymore. The word has become a battlefield, not a bridge. And in that battlefield, the real issue, love, trust, care, vanishes beneath the rubble of broken meaning. At its darkest, semantic collapse is not accidental. It is strategy. Throughout history, regimes and movements have weaponized language, shifting definitions until people no longer know what they are fighting for or against. If peace means war, if truth means propaganda, if safety means obedience, then the words themselves rot, leaving us trapped in contradictions we can't name. This is how reality itself unravels, not by force, but by words collapsing under their own weight. Philosophers have warned about this for centuries. If definitions are unstable, then logic becomes impossible. You cannot prove or disprove anything if the meaning of the words changes mid-sentence. It's like trying to cross a bridge while someone rearranges the planks beneath your feet. You might think you're walking toward resolution, but really, you're circling endlessly, chasing meanings that slip further away with every step. And here is the unsettling part. Semantic collapse doesn't only happen in public debates or manipulative speeches. It happens inside your own mind. You tell yourself you are chasing success, but does that mean money, recognition, freedom, happiness? The definition shifts every time you fall short, always just out of reach. You tell yourself you are searching for love, but the meaning changes depending on who hurt you, who stayed, who left. Your goals collapse under shifting semantics, leaving you exhausted, chasing illusions of words that refuse to stay still. So how do we escape it? Perhaps we cannot, not fully. But we can learn to notice the shift. To pause mid-argument and ask, what do you mean by that word? To hold language steady before it collapses. To anchor ourselves not in the endless drift of words, but in the reality they try, imperfectly, to describe. Because semantic collapse is not just a flaw in conversation. It is a crack in the very fabric of truth. When words lose their ground, thought itself loses direction. And once thought collapses, anything can be made to mean anything, and nothing at all. That is the true danger, not that we disagree, but that we no longer even share the same language of reality. So the next time you feel yourself arguing and realize the topic has shifted, remember, you may not be fighting about truth anymore, you may be fighting in the ruins of words themselves. Lock without a key. Imagine a lock that was never built to open. No mechanism, no hidden notch, no key that exists anywhere in the world. And yet, there it stands, in front of you, demanding attention. You know it cannot be solved, but still, you rattle it, you search for tools, you imagine the shape of the key. This is the lock without a key, a condition designed to be unsolvable, but still obeyed, still followed, still haunting those who confront it. We live surrounded by these invisible locks. Rules, systems, structures that pretend to be solvable puzzles, but in truth contain no solution at all. Consider bureaucracy. Fill out form after form, stamp after stamp, line after line, and still the door does not open. You are told you're missing one more document, one more verification, one more approval. The structure sustains itself not by granting access, but by endlessly deferring it. You play the game even as you suspect the game was never meant to end. The lock remains, because the system thrives on your attempt to open it. Think of social expectations. If you work hard enough, you will be rewarded. If you are kind enough, you will be loved. If you behave perfectly, you will be safe. These sound like conditions that can be met, but they are locks without keys. Hard work does not guarantee reward. Kindness does not guarantee love. Perfection does not guarantee safety. And yet we pursue them relentlessly, as though the key might one day appear in our pocket. We wear ourselves down in front of unsolvable doors, not because they are just, but because they are familiar. History gives darker examples. Totalitarian states often imposed rules no citizen could ever fully obey. Speak freely and you are punished. Stay silent and you are punished too. Report your neighbor and you are safe for a moment, until someone else reports you. The system is a lock without a key, designed not to be solved but to ensure permanent control. The cruelty lies in the illusion that if you try hard enough, you might survive. The truth is, survival was never guaranteed. Psychology mirrors this perfectly. Think of obsessive loops. I must not think of this thought. But the moment you forbid it, the thought multiplies. The condition is unsolvable, because trying to obey it guarantees failure. Or think of shame. I must prove I am not ashamed. Yet, every attempt to prove it reveals the shame more strongly. These are locks that tighten the more you struggle, prisons that grow deeper the more you seek the exit. The lock without a key reveals something haunting about human nature. We obey even when we know the task is impossible. Why? Because the alternative, admitting the futility, terrifies us more. The lock gives us structure, purpose, motion. To walk away is to face emptiness, to admit the game was rigged from the start. So we rattle the lock again and again, convincing ourselves the sound is progress. But here is the unsettling twist. The lock does not need a key. The lock needs you. Its power comes not from being solved, but from keeping you circling around it. Every attempt strengthens its hold. Every ritual, every repetition feeds it. It becomes eternal not because it is unbreakable, but because we refuse to stop trying. Think of the myths. Sisyphus pushing his stone, never reaching the summit. Tantalus reaching for water, never quenching his thirst. These are the oldest locks without keys, conditions designed not to be solved but to be suffered. And yet, even knowing this, we see ourselves in them. Because somewhere inside, we are drawn to the impossible, compelled to chase it even when we know it will not open. So the next time you stand before a lock, ask, does the key even exist? Or am I only here because I was taught to obey the door, to follow the rule, to seek the solution that was never meant to be found? The cruelest prisons are not the ones with walls, they are the ones that convince you to keep searching for a key that isn't there. The lock without a key is not a mystery to solve. It is a mirror. It shows us the systems we serve, the illusions we follow, the energy we waste on puzzles designed to have no end. And until we see the truth, that some locks were never built to open, we will remain rattling the chains, confusing the sound of effort for the promise of escape. Cognitive override gate. Imagine standing before a decision that feels all wrong. Every instinct in your body screams, don't do it. Your pulse quickens, your muscles resist, your gut tightens with warning. Yet the logic in front of you is undeniable. Step by step, reason proves that the very thing your instincts reject is the only correct action. To move forward, you must do something that feels unnatural, even dangerous. This is the cognitive override gate, a threshold where logic becomes so counterintuitive it forces instinct to surrender. At first, this sounds impossible. Aren't instincts supposed to guide survival? Shouldn't they protect us from harm? But instincts are ancient, carved from a time when the world was smaller, threats simpler. Logic is newer, an invention of reflection, abstraction, calculation. When the two collide, instinct pulls you one way, logic another. And at the gate, you cannot follow both. One must yield. History is full of moments where instinct was wrong, and reason had to seize control. Sailors once believed they would fall off the edge of the world if they sailed too far. Instinct urged them to cling to familiar shores. Logic, through charts and mathematics, revealed otherwise, and only those who overrode their fear found new continents. In medicine, instinct once insisted that bloodletting cured illness, that fevers should be suppressed at all costs. Logic, through science, proved the opposite. To save lives, doctors had to betray what felt right. But the cognitive override gate is not only historic, it is deeply personal. Picture a pilot in crisis. Every fiber of their being tells them to pull the nose of the plane up during a stall. Yet training and physics demand the opposite: push the nose down to regain speed. Those who follow instinct crash. Those who override it survive. Or think of a firefighter ordered to run into the flames, when every primal urge insists on fleeing. Their logic, the knowledge of how fire spreads, carries them forward through the terror, and lives are saved because instinct was silenced. And yet, there is a price. Crossing the gate feels like betrayal. Your body resists, your mind trembles, your identity fractures. To do what logic commands, you must distrust the very signals that evolution carved into you. Too often, that mistrust lingers. If instinct can be wrong here, can it be trusted anywhere? The gate leaves scars, because once you override your deepest impulses, you are never quite the same. But sometimes, the opposite occurs: logic fails, and instinct saves. Soldiers on the battlefield describe ducking seconds before a shot they never saw. Drivers speak of swerving without thought, avoiding collisions their conscious mind never registered. The paradox of the gate is that you never know in advance which to follow. Sometimes instinct is the trap. Sometimes logic is. The terror comes from not knowing until it's too late. And this reveals the true weight of the cognitive override gate. It is not simply a choice between instinct and reason. It is the realization that survival often demands betraying one or the other. You cannot live by logic alone, nor by instinct alone. To navigate the gate, you must decide, in the raw heat of the moment, which voice to silence. And that decision carries the full gravity of fate. So the next time you find yourself facing a choice that feels utterly wrong yet undeniably rational, pause at the threshold. Ask yourself, is this the gate where instinct must surrender, or the gate where reason must yield? Because some thresholds cannot be avoided. Some doors demand betrayal. And the cognitive override gate is one of them, the place where survival is decided not by what you feel, not by what you think, but by which voice you choose to silence. Overflow illusion. There is a strange kind of blindness that does not come from too little, but from too much. A blindness born not of scarcity, but of overflow. You face a problem, a question, a crossroads, and instead of one answer or two, you are flooded with possibilities. Dozens of solutions, hundreds of strategies, endless advice. At first it feels like abundance, a gift, proof that clarity must be near. But the more solutions you gather, the less you can see. The true answer does not shine more brightly, it drowns, buried beneath the weight of alternatives. This is the overflow illusion, the trap where too many options suffocate the one that matters. The human mind was not built for infinity. Choice was once simple: hunt here or there, trust or distrust, fight or flee. But now, every decision branches endlessly. Which career, which city, which partner, which path to meaning, which way to live. Each option claims validity. Each solution insists it is correct. And so you sift, you analyze, you compare. But instead of finding clarity, the process consumes you. Logic fractures under the weight of abundance, and truth slips further away. Consider the everyday examples. Someone seeks advice on health. One voice says eat less, another says eat more. One says cut sugar, another says avoid fat. One prescribes supplements, another rejects them. Each is plausible, each backed by data, each defended with passion. But the sheer volume of solutions leaves the seeker paralyzed, unable to trust any. The true answer, perhaps simple, perhaps quiet, suffocates beneath the noise. Or think of someone seeking purpose. Books, podcasts, gurus, philosophies, each offers a different formula for meaning. Instead of clarity, the seeker drowns in contradictions, unable to hear the one whisper that could have guided them. The illusion is that abundance means progress. That if one solution is good, 1,000 must be better. But the mind does not scale endlessly. Past a certain point, the more you add, the less you gain. It is not a straight line, but a drowning curve. What feels like empowerment becomes paralysis. What feels like clarity becomes fog. The overflow illusion convinces you that more solutions equal better choices, when in fact they only bury the correct one deeper. This is not just personal. It is systemic. Governments build policies bloated with committees, amendments, compromises. The more solutions proposed, the less any one path can be seen clearly. Companies offer endless product lines, overwhelming consumers into confusion. Even science itself, with its countless studies and theories, can leave seekers of truth lost in the contradictions, unable to see the patterns hidden beneath. In every field, the illusion is the same, that overflow guarantees answers, when it often guarantees only noise. There is something almost cruel about the way this trap unfolds. Scarcity feels unfair but simple. You cannot choose what does not exist. But abundance feels generous, even hopeful, until you realize it blinds as effectively as absence. It is a trick of perception. Too much light can blind as surely as darkness. The overflow illusion turns abundance into a mask, hiding the truth in plain sight, smothered beneath excess. And yet, people cling to it. Because abundance feels safe. To gather more options, more advice, more perspectives seems responsible. To reduce, to cut away, to choose fewer feels reckless. So we hoard choices the way misers hoard wealth, believing that more will protect us, even as it traps us. The irony is brutal. The very act of collecting more solutions becomes the reason no solution can be chosen. History shows this again and again. Leaders who collapse under endless strategies, unable to commit. Movements that fracture into hundreds of sub-movements, drowning the original vision. Thinkers who drown in their own notes, their clarity lost beneath infinite drafts. Even ordinary lives mirror this. People paralyzed not by lack of opportunity, but by the endless overflow of it. The trap is not that we cannot solve problems, but that we are buried alive beneath solutions. So how do you escape? The answer is not to find more, but to cut away. To strip down the noise until only the essential remains. To realize that clarity is not found in overflow, but in focus. The true solution is often quiet, simple, fragile, easily overlooked in the flood. It does not shout as loudly as the others. It waits, drowned beneath the noise, until you are willing to silence the overflow long enough to hear it. Imagine standing in a river with too many currents. Each one pulls you in a different direction. If you fight them all, you are dragged under. If you let them pass, the water clears, and the true current reveals itself. That is the challenge of the overflow illusion, not to collect more streams, but to stand still long enough to see which one actually carries you forward. The trap will always tempt you. There will always be more books to read, more experts to ask, more strategies to weigh. But remember this, the answer does not multiply as the solutions do. The answer remains singular, hidden beneath the flood. So the next time you feel overwhelmed by too many options, pause. Do not ask, what else can I add? Ask, what can I remove? Because clarity is not a matter of abundance. It is a matter of subtraction. Because some traps do not starve you of answers. They drown you in them. And until you learn to strip away the noise, the truth will always suffocate beneath the overflow. A tractor paradox. Imagine standing at a crossroads. One path stretches left, another right, another straight ahead. Each promises a different future. You agonize over the decision, weighing the risks, the rewards, the unknowns. But what if every path, no matter how different, leads you to the same destination? What if the outcome is not shaped by your choice, but by an unseen gravity that pulls all choices into one? This is the attractor paradox, the unsettling truth that no matter which way you turn, you may end up exactly where you were meant to go. At first, it sounds like fatalism. Why bother choosing if the ending is always the same? But the paradox runs deeper than that. It does not say your choices are meaningless, only that meaning lies not in avoiding the destination, but in how you arrive. Picture a river feeding into the sea. The tributaries wind differently, some through mountains, some through plains, some rushing, some meandering, but every stream ends in the same ocean. Your choices shape the journey, not the end. History is full of examples that echo this paradox. Consider great leaders who tried to evade destiny. Oedipus's parents cast him away to prevent prophecy, yet their very actions ensured it was fulfilled. Caesar ignored warnings and omens, but his death came on the Ides of March as foretold. In both stories, choices shifted the path but not the outcome. The attractor pulled events toward the same point, no matter how violently they resisted. Even in science, we see the same pattern. In chaos theory, there is the concept of the strange attractor, patterns toward which systems evolve regardless of starting conditions. Weather, turbulence, ecosystems, all complex, unpredictable, yet all pulled toward repeating shapes. The paradox whispers that perhaps human lives too have such attractors. No matter the initial choices, certain outcomes exert a pull that cannot be escaped. Psychologically, the attractor paradox both terrifies and comforts. Terrifies, because it suggests freedom may be smaller than we believe. Comforts, because it suggests meaning is deeper than we fear. If outcomes converge, then failure and success lose their sharp edges. Every wrong turn may still lead to right arrival. The job you didn't get, the relationship that ended, the opportunity missed, perhaps all are just tributaries feeding the same ocean. But there is another layer, darker still. What if the attractor outcome is not something you want? What if it is tragedy, repetition, collapse? Imagine trying to escape patterns, addiction, heartbreak, mistakes. Yet no matter what you choose, you circle back to the same point. The paradox can feel like curse as much as destiny, the universe whispering, "You will arrive where I want you, not where you want to be." Philosophers have long wrestled with this. The Stoics spoke of amor fati, the love of fate, not resisting where all paths converge, but embracing it. Eastern traditions speak of samsara, cycles of rebirth, where every choice returns the soul to the same lessons until enlightenment breaks the loop. Even modern thinkers suggest free will may be less about altering outcomes and more about altering awareness, choosing how to meet the inevitable. So what does the attractor paradox demand of you? Perhaps not despair, but depth. If all choices lead to the same end, then the question shifts, not how do I avoid this outcome, but who will I become on the way? One person may arrive bitter, another peaceful, another transformed, all standing at the same destination, but carrying different selves. The paradox robs you of control, but gifts you meaning. The journey matters, because the end does not change. And perhaps, hidden within, is one last mystery. What if the attractor paradox is not absolute? What if the convergence is not trap but test? What if only by accepting that all roads lead to one do you discover the one road that doesn't? Maybe freedom is not in resisting the pull, but in understanding it so deeply that you step outside it. The paradox is the lock, but maybe awareness is the key. So the next time you agonize over choice, pause. Consider that the outcome may already be waiting for you, no matter the direction. And ask not how to escape the attractor, but how to arrive at it awake. Because in the end, the paradox may not be about fate or freedom, but about realizing that destiny is not what happens to you. It is what you bring with you when all paths meet. Entry-exit fusion. Imagine standing at a doorway. One side is the beginning, the other the end. You take a step forward, expecting to leave one space and enter another. But as your foot crosses the threshold, you realize something strange. There is no difference. The moment of entry and the moment of exit collapse into the same instant, indistinguishable, inseparable. This is entry-exit fusion, a paradox where starting and finishing are not 2 points in time, but a single event, folded together. Think of a circle. Where does it begin? Where does it end? You can place your finger anywhere and call it the start, but the same place is also the finish. Every departure is already an arrival, every arrival already a departure. That's the unsettling truth of the fusion. It exposes the illusion that journeys are linear, when in reality they may be loops, folding back on themselves so tightly that the beginning and the ending are one. We see this in life constantly. Consider birth and death. We think of them as opposites, the start of life and its final closure. But in another sense, each is the doorway into the other. Your death is not just an ending, it is the entry into whatever lies beyond. Your birth was not just a beginning, it was the exit from whatever lay before. Entry and exit, fused at the threshold. Or think of a story. The first words you read set the stage, the last words close it. But in the deepest stories, the ending loops back to the beginning. The last page reframes the first, and you realize they are the same moment, only seen from different sides. Once upon a time and the end mirror each other, folding into one point. Psychology gives us subtler examples. A person spends years searching for purpose, imagining it lies far ahead. But when they finally find it, they realize it was always there from the start. Their beginning and their end were fused, waiting only for recognition. The destination is the same place they started, only understood differently. It's the traveler who goes around the world to discover that home was the point all along. Philosophy has always been haunted by entry-exit fusion. The Greeks spoke of the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, beginning and ending in the same bite. Eastern thought, too, whispers the same lesson, that the end of one cycle is the entry into another, that samsara is both prison and path. In modern science, time itself hints at this. Black holes and singularities where beginnings and endings fold together, indistinguishable in the collapse. But here is the unsettling implication. If entry and exit are one, then the very notion of progress may be an illusion. We comfort ourselves with movement. I'm starting something new. I'm leaving something behind. But what if every entry is only the recognition of an exit already completed? What if we never move forward at all, but only orbit the same threshold endlessly, mistaking each crossing for a journey? Consider relationships. You begin with a hello, you end with a goodbye. But how many times, looking back, does the hello already contain the goodbye? The seeds of ending are present at the start, and the goodbye is only the flowering of what was always there. The entry is the exit, fused in one moment disguised as two. Entry-exit fusion unsettles us because it denies the comfort of separation. We want beginnings to be hopeful, endings to be final. But the paradox insists they are the same, that hope and finality are not opposites but twins. Every first step already contains the last, and every last step already echoes the first. So the next time you cross a threshold, literal or metaphorical, pause. Notice the eerie stillness in that moment. You are both arriving and leaving, both starting and finishing. The doorway is not 2 points in time but one. And maybe that is the secret. That life itself is not a line from entry to exit, but a single fused instant, endlessly unfolding as though it were both the first and the last breath. Dimensional crossover key. Imagine a key. In one world, it turns easily, sliding into the lock with precision, opening doors as if the universe itself approves. But carry that same key into another reality, and it jams, twists wrong, shatters the lock, or worse, it opens something you never meant to touch. This is the dimensional crossover key. Logic that functions perfectly in one system, but breaks when applied to another. The tool is real, but its meaning is bound to the world it was forged in. Outside that world, it becomes dangerous. Think of mathematics. In Euclidean space, parallel lines never meet. Entire systems of geometry, architecture, navigation, everything works because this principle is true. But shift into non-Euclidean space, and the axiom collapses. Parallels can converge, diverge, or loop back into themselves. The same logic that built cathedrals and cities becomes useless in curved space. The key works in one dimension of truth, but in another, it breaks the door. Or think of morality. In a small tribe, loyalty to kin is the highest virtue. If someone threatens your family, you defend them at all costs. The logic is sound, survival-based, unshakable. But transplant that same logic into a globalized world and it mutates. Loyalty to kin becomes nepotism. Favoring bloodlines over fairness corrodes justice, breeds corruption, destabilizes entire systems. A moral key forged in one dimension of society cracks the locks of another. Technology carries the same paradox. Fossil fuels were once the perfect key to progress. Burn them, and you unlock industry, comfort, speed, global power. The logic was irrefutable in the 19th century. The more coal, the more growth. But carry that same key into the 21st century, and the lock breaks. The very fuel that opened prosperity now poisons climate, destabilizes weather, erodes coastlines. A key that once unlocked advancement now opens catastrophe. Even in personal life, the dimensional crossover key appears. As a child, obedience keeps you safe. If you listen to parents, then you avoid danger. That logic is perfect in the closed dimension of childhood. But when carried into adulthood, it fractures. Blind obedience breeds exploitation, stagnation, loss of self. The same key that kept you alive now locks you into prisons of silence. Or take ambition. In early career, the logic of work harder, get more opens doors. But in later life, the same key breaks health, relationships and meaning. What worked in one dimension of time collapses in another. The unsettling part is how invisible this crossover is while it happens. Inside the first reality, the key feels eternal. No one questions it. Generations pass it down, swearing it is universal. And then one day, the context shifts, the dimension bends, and the key betrays you. But the betrayal is not in the key itself, it is in your insistence that one logic must fit all realities. Philosophers whisper about this when they warn against universals. Laws of thought, laws of society, even laws of physics, all might only belong to the dimensions where they were born. Apply them elsewhere, and they break. Relativity shattered Newton. Quantum mechanics shattered relativity's neatness. Each was a perfect key in its own chamber, until the door opened to a new one. There is something terrifying in this. Because it means that certainty is never final. What you know today as unshakable truth may dissolve the moment the frame of reality shifts. And reality is always shifting. Technology alters context. Culture bends rules. Time itself changes what makes sense. The keys in your pocket today may be jagged shards tomorrow. But there is also something hauntingly beautiful. It means that no dimension can imprison you forever. The locks that confine you now may one day be undone, not by brute force, but by stepping into a new frame where the rules themselves change. What fails here may succeed there. What seems impossible now may be inevitable in a different reality. The dimensional crossover key does not only break, it also frees. So the next time you find a logic that feels universal, ask yourself, does it belong only here? Would it hold in another place, another time, another shape of reality? And if not, are you ready for the moment it fractures? Because one day, you will try to use that key again. And the door it opens may not be the one you expected.